Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Mr. Storyteller. Before you dive into tonight's nightmare, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now, get comfortable and relax.
A chill wind whispered through the tall pines as dusk turned to night, and the old house at the edge of Briarwood sat silent beneath a bruised sky. Evelyn Calloway had been drawn to it for reasons she did not entirely understand, a combination of a relentless curiosity and a personal need to confront her own restless nightmares. Rumors about this place, passed down among locals with trembling voices, spoke of ancient wrongs and spectral visitors who emerged when the moon was full. Tonight, however, was not an ordinary full moon night. It was the night when Evelyn would attempt to reconcile her fear with the truth buried in legends. Evelyn's footsteps echoed in the stone corridor as she pushed open the oak door. Inside, the faint odor of damp rot mingled with that of old paper and forgotten memories. With a single lantern in hand and a small leather-bound journal tucked under her arm, she sought answers to the whispered tales, true scary stories to fall asleep, a collection of accounts that had haunted her since childhood. The book, it was said, held more than mere stories. It was a portal to those unsettled souls who wished to be remembered. The silence in the mansion was absolute until a faint creak announced another presence. Evelyn paused, heart pounding, peering into the darkness. "Is someone there?" she called softly. Her voice broke the heavy quiet, and from behind a tattered curtain in a vacant drawing room, a shadow shifted. A low rasp of breath answered her, and then came a voice, brittle with sorrow. "I've been waiting for you." Evelyn's hand trembled as she raised her lantern higher. Standing before her was a figure, partially draped in moth-eaten garments, its eyes deep, sorrowful voids that seemed to harbor memories of endless nights. "Who are you?" she whispered, stepping back instinctively. The figure's lips parted in a sorrowful smile. "I was once like you, a seeker of truth in haunted tales. I read the stories meant to lull children to sleep, but these were no fantasies. They were confessions of restless spirits condemned to wander these halls." Its voice, layered with regret and despair, echoed off the crumbling walls. Evelyn's grip on her journal tightened. "Then why am I here? Is it fate or madness that drives us to these cursed relics?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. The phantom's gaze drifted toward a broken book lying on a decaying desk. "This book," it said, "was not meant for young hearts. It records every regret, every painful echo of souls who fell asleep to lullabies of terror, only to awaken within dreams that became endless nightmares." Haunted by the weight of those words, Evelyn found herself wandering further into the mansion, her steps guided by an unseen hand toward a study filled with dusty tomes and handwritten accounts. There, on a desk beneath a solitary window, lay a battered copy of the infamous book. It was bound in cracked leather, its title worn away by the passage of time. As she opened the cover, she felt as if she were trespassing into a hidden chamber of human misery. Inside, the pages chronicled true accounts of terror, a multitude of voices detailing encounters with ominous entities and whispered threats in the dead of night. One particular entry caught her eye, a chilling description of a ritual where a family, desperate to escape nightmares, found themselves encircled by shadows. The account ended with an ominous line, "Sleep becomes the portal and death the herald." A sudden gust of wind slammed the study door shut. Evelyn's heart raced. "Don't be afraid," came the disembodied voice from the corridor, now soft but insistent. Her lantern flickered, casting long, quivering shadows across the room. "I understand, child. I too have known terror like this." Evelyn's eyes scanned the dark corners as if trying to locate the speaker, but only silence replied. Overwhelmed by the oppressive atmosphere, she began reading aloud one of the narratives, hoping perhaps that articulating the words would dispel the suffocating gloom. "In the silence of the night, when the boundary between sleep and reality thins, be wary of those who knock on the door of your soul," she read, her voice a tentative tremor. Almost instantly, the pages seemed to shudder, and a cold presence slithered across the room. The whispered dialogue grew louder, as if the shadows themselves were speaking. "You seek answers," it hissed from behind her. Evelyn spun around, her eyes meeting those of yet another spectral inhabitant, a woman clad in antiquated mourning attire, her eyes dark and accusing. I only wish to understand, Evelyn replied, voice cracking with both fear and determination. I want to know why these stories persist, why souls are trapped between sleep and wakefulness. The morning woman's expression twisted in pity and warning. Some truths once awakened cannot be forgotten. They demand to be faced, even if it means reliving the nightmares of our past. The ghost stepped closer, and with each haunting footstep, the room grew colder. I was the one who attempted to put an end to these cursed tales, only to find that horror's grip is inexorable. Outside, the wind began to howl, rattling the ancient window panes. The uninvited guests of the mansion gathered in the periphery of Evelyn's lantern light, each an echo of a tortured existence, each bound to the dark energy of the tales within the book. As she continued reading, an unsettling force radiated from the pages, drawing from memories of pain and cursed encounters. The spectral voices merged into a low, mournful hum that harmonized with the gusts outside. As the night deepened, Evelyn discovered that the book was more than a simple recounting of events. It was a map of the spirit realm, a chronicle of souls condemned to relive their terror. In one entry, an old man had written how he had spent his nights recording the voices of those who had come to claim him during sleep. I dreamed of a faceless nightmare that whispered my name, promising that sleep was nothing but the precursor to oblivion, the entry read. Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes as she realized that each line was a testament to enduring pain. "Why are you showing me this?" she demanded, her voice rising in a blend of courage and frustration, echoing off the walls as if challenging the spectral congregation. Why am I, a mere mortal, burdened with these truths? A shadow detached itself from the darkness near the door and stepped forward into the flickering light. It was the first apparition she had seen with clarity, a man whose eyes held both sorrow and warning. Because, he intoned in a deep, resonant voice, every soul has a debt to pay. The past is never truly silent. It calls out for justice, for recognition, for release. His voice faltered as he continued, sleep has become a trap, not a refuge. These stories are real because our nightmares are more than simple illusions. They are manifestations of every regret we've ever carried. In that moment, Evelyn became an unwilling confidant to the tragedies of those who had long been condemned to linger. She recalled her own troubled past, times when sleep evaded her as spectral memories surfaced from a deep well of grief and guilt. Had she always been drawn to these horrors as if seeking forgiveness or redemption from unseen forces? The thought made her shiver, and she closed the book with trembling fingers. Outside, the wind's fury escalated. The voices, now a swirling chorus of lament, began reciting a dialogue that made the very air tremble. "You cannot escape what you have invited," they intoned in unison. "In your dreams, in your waking hours, the darkness will follow." Each word struck Evelyn like a blow, as if the past was clawing at her very soul. Her breath came in ragged gasps, and yet a stubborn part of her remained unwilling to flee. "Maybe I invited it," she murmured to herself, her voice both a confession and a challenge. Clutching the book tighter, Evelyn moved deeper into the labyrinth of corridors, compelled by the need to understand the origin of these eternal hauntings. Amid the labyrinth of dusty rooms, she discovered photographs of families long gone, their eyes seeming to follow her every move. At one end of a narrow hallway, a mirror, cracked and fogged, reflected not only her image but also countless ghostly silhouettes that flitted behind her. "Who are they?" she whispered, her voice shaking as if questioning the very fabric of time. From the mirror came a soft, sorrowful reply. "We are the memories forgotten, the whispers of despair that the world chose to ignore. We are trapped in the realm between sleep and waking, condemned by the secrets of the past." The voices interlaced with the sound of dripping water and creaking wood, transforming the corridor into a theater of melancholic revelations. With each step, Evelyn's terror grew, yet so did her resolve to piece together the puzzle of this dismal legacy. In a final dusty chamber, lined with journals and handwritten letters, she uncovered the account of a woman named Lillian, a once promising writer whose life had been derailed by tragic misfortune. Lillian's words, written in desperate script, recounted a series of nightmares so intense they bled into reality. "I lie awake, knowing that sleep is no longer safe," her entry began. "Each night I feel the presence of those who came before, and each time they claim a piece of my soul. I see faces in the dark, twisted with sorrow and rage, and I know that I will join them if I cannot sever the chains of this curse." As Evelyn read, the temperature in the chamber plummeted. She felt the icy grip of despair threading through her veins. "Lillian, how did you think to break free from it?" Evelyn asked aloud, her voice echoing off the barren walls. A sudden, eerie calm fell over the room as if the very air awaited an answer. Then came a whisper, almost too soft to catch. "By admitting that we are all complicit in our nightmares, the stories we keep hidden from ourselves become the architects of our fears." Tears streamed down Evelyn's face as she slowly realized that the book was more than a record. It was a mirror reflecting the darkest corners of the human soul. Each story, every tragedy, was intertwined with the secrets of those who dared to sleep and dream, and the very act of reading them had summoned their hauntings into the physical realm. The revelation struck her with the force of an avalanche. The ghosts were not merely victims of an ancient curse, they were the embodiment of the collective guilt and anguish of generations. A sudden, forceful knock at the chamber door startled her. "Evelyn, you must leave," boomed the man from earlier, his spectral visage now more defined against the ghostly backdrop of the room. "The curse you are unraveling does not allow for redemption through exposure. Knowledge without respite only deepens the wounds of the dead." His stern tone resonated with both command and mourning. "But I need to know," she protested, rising unsteadily. "I need to understand how to break this cycle. I can't let these souls remain trapped in endless torment." The man's eyes, ancient and full of sorrow, softened momentarily. "Some secrets are meant to be laid to rest," he warned. "By delving too deep, you risk becoming part of the horror. The stories you read are echoes of lives steeped in regret, and once you listen to them, they may never let you sleep again." For a long, agonizing moment, Evelyn hesitated at the threshold, torn between her insatiable curiosity and the latent terror that pulsated in her veins. The spectral congregation in the room seemed to close in around her, their silent pleas and sorrowful murmurs urging her to abandon her quest. Yet, something inside her, the determination born of years of unspoken grief, propelled her forward. "I cannot ignore what I feel," she declared, voice trembling yet resolute. "I must see this through, for the sake of those who can no longer speak, and for my own peace." With that, she pushed the door open and stepped into the dark hallway, her lantern held high, as if warding off the inevitable embrace of the supernatural. As Evelyn navigated the winding corridors of memory and regret, the mansion itself began to reveal its true nature, a living embodiment of despair where every creak and groan seemed to recount a sorrowful tale. Doors slammed in sudden gusts of wind, footsteps echoed from empty rooms, and faint, mournful voices intertwined with the hum of a long-forgotten lullaby. At every turn, Evelyn encountered spectral figures, each locked in their own tragic loop of remembrance. Some reached out with desperate hands, while others wept silently, their faces twisted in anguish. A particularly striking figure was that of a young child, her eyes wide with terror, yet filled with a heartbreaking hope. "Please, don't be afraid," the child whispered in a tone that belied her ethereal form. "They promise safety in the dark, but it is only the beginning of the nightmare." Evelyn knelt beside her, her hand shaking as she tried to comfort a soul far too young to have known such torment. "Who are they?" she asked softly. The child pointed a trembling finger toward a vast, shadowed corridor, where the darkness seemed to pulse and breathe. "They are the collectors of regret, the keepers of our sorrow. Once you cross their threshold, there is no returning to the light." That revelation chilled Evelyn to her core. The mansion was not merely haunted. It was a purgatory for every frightened soul that had ever known despair. With each step deeper into the labyrinth, the line between her own memories and the spectral accounts blurred. She could no longer tell where her fears ended and where theirs began. In the final stretch of her journey through the decaying mansion, Evelyn encountered a grand staircase that spiraled upward into what appeared to be a vast, shadowy hall. Here, the air was thick with the murmurs of countless voices, their collective sorrow forming a palpable fog. At the top of the stairs stood a massive mirror framed in ornate, tarnished silver. In the reflection, Evelyn saw not just her own terrified eyes, but those of every lost soul chronicled in the book. Their expressions were etched with pain, regret, and an urgent longing for release. "I see you," one of the apparitions whispered directly into her mind, its voice soft and pleading. "We are you, your regrets, your nightmares, your unspoken sorrows. Do you dare face what lies within?" The challenge resonated deeply within her, prompting a cascade of memories and self-revelations. In that mirror, she recognized the shadow of her own suppressed guilt and grief, ghosts of her past that she had long denied. For years, she had believed that understanding horror was a way to quell her inner demons, but now it was clear that the barrier between external terror and internal despair was far more fragile than she could have imagined. Determined to confront both the supernatural and the inner darkness that plagued her, Evelyn stepped closer to the mirror. "I accept you," she murmured, voice wavering but sincere. "I accept my past, my pain, and all the stories I've been too scared to face." As the words left her lips, the mirror's surface rippled like disturbed water, and the spectral figures began to fade, their voices merging into a final, bittersweet chorus of gratitude and farewell. In that moment of acceptance, the oppressive weight that had burdened the mansion's walls seemed to lift. The apparitions, freed from their endless cycle of torment, nodded in silent thanks before dissolving into the ether. The house, once a prison for sorrow, began to exhale a long-held breath of relief, its creaks transforming into the soft murmur of a heart finally at rest. Evelyn sank to the floor amid the scattered pages of the infamous book, tears mixing with a newfound sense of peace. Though she knew the journey she had taken was wrought with pain and terror, it was also one of redemption, a cathartic communion with every soul that had ever whispered its secrets in the dark. The mansion, the book, and the spectral figures all receded into the quiet darkness of the night, leaving Evelyn with a profound understanding that sometimes the scariest stories are not the ones that haunt us in sleep, but the ones that reside within us, waiting for the courage to be acknowledged. As dawn's early light began to penetrate the shattered windows, Evelyn closed the journal, her heart steadied by the acceptance of her own buried grief. She stepped outside, leaving behind the haunted corridors and spectral echoes, but carrying with her the knowledge that horror, no matter how chilling, could be overcome by confronting and embracing the truths within. In the interplay between shadow and light, fear and acceptance, she had discovered a terrifying freedom, a liberation from the endless nightmares that had once held her captive.
Story number 2.
The train of dusk swept over the bleak landscape as Mara Donovan's car trundled down a narrow, twisting road shrouded by ancient, gnarled trees. The moon, a mere sliver in a heavy, ink-black sky, cast eerie shadows across the countryside, the wind whispering secrets of untold terrors. Mara, a writer with a penchant for the macabre, had chased rumors of the abandoned Hallow Ridge Asylum, a place fabled for horrors that defied rational explanation. Her heart, a mix of curiosity and dread, pounded steadily against her ribs as the haunting silhouette of the asylum emerged from the darkness, its broken turrets and twisted iron gates foretelling calamities long past. Stepping out of her car, Mara hesitated at the threshold. The wind carried the faint, mournful strains of a lullaby, its echo both beautiful and bone-chilling. Clutching her journal and a flashlight, she crossed the threshold into the asylum's decaying courtyard. The iron gate creaked a lament as it closed behind her, sealing her fate with a finality that sent shivers down her spine. Inside, a labyrinth of corroded corridors and barren hallways awaited. The air was a cocktail of mildew and despair, heavy with the lingering echoes of lost souls. As she advanced, the feeble beam of her flashlight danced over graffiti and peeling wallpaper, occasionally illuminating a distant, dark figure that vanished as soon as her eyes focused. Every sound, the rustle of unseen movements, the drip of water from broken pipes, amplified her anxiety, yet deep within her, a stubborn determination pushed her onward. In a desolate common room, chipped wooden chairs and a shattered mirror decorated the room like relics of another era. Here, Mara felt an intense pressure, as if unseen eyes were scrutinizing her every movement. Resting against the far wall was an old, dust-covered piano. Its keys, worn by time, seemed to beckon her with a familiar sorrow. Tentatively, she pressed a key, and a mournful note reverberated through the room, mingling with distant whispers. "Do you play, or do you suffer?" a voice rasped from the corner. Mara spun around, her flashlight revealing a gaunt man in a tattered hospital gown standing beneath a sagging portrait. His eyes, sunken yet oddly aware, glistened with a spectral intensity. I'm just a seeker of stories," Mara stammered, swallowing hard. "Stories here are chains for the damned," he murmured, his voice laden with sorrow and dread. "I am Elias. I once thought redemption lay in uncovering every sorrow hidden in these walls, but I discovered too late that some secrets are not meant for human eyes." Before Mara could inquire further, a sudden gust slammed the door behind her, plunging the room into momentary darkness. In the brief silence, the air thickened with a foreboding presence that pressed on her chest. Elias's voice floated once more, soft yet urgent. "Leave while you still can before the asylum claims you too." His warning, a plea submerged in despair, resonated within Mara as a dire harbinger. Yet, the call of the unknown was too potent to ignore. Driven by both terror and an insatiable thirst for truth, Mara ventured deeper into the asylum. The corridors twisted like the innards of a beast, and every step forward felt like a descent into a waking nightmare. Faded murals depicted scenes of torment, figures writhing in anguish beneath a malignant sky. Somewhere deep within the building, a clock's chime echoed, its sound a countdown to a fate Mara dared not imagine. In a dimly lit hallway, she discovered a heavy door, scarred by claw marks and strange symbols. With the keys of fate in her trembling hands, she pushed it open. Inside lay a library, its shelves lined with brittle journals and records of patients who had once occupied this site of unspeakable abuse. As Mara leafed through these brittle pages, their sentences spiraled into confessions of pain, rage, and spectral madness. Many mentioned nocturnal visitations like voices that told of sins hidden beneath layers of institutional cruelty, and spectral figures that roamed the halls under the cloak of night. One entry caught her eye, a desperate scrawl from a woman named Adelaide. It spoke of a recurring nightmare in which the asylum's original doctor, a man rumored to have dabbed in forbidden arts, had returned to claim the souls of those who dared sleep within these cursed walls. Her last line seethed with terror. He whispers that sleep is the gateway and death the final ward. The words unsettled Mara deeply, for she too had long battled with nocturnal terrors that crawled into her sleep. As she read on, a soft click resounded behind her. Turning sharply, she found Adelaide's faded portrait mounted on the wall. The painted eyes, though still, seemed to follow her every movement. A chill coursed through her veins as whispers began to merge around her, voices overlapping in a ghostly chorus. They spoke in incomplete sentences full of agony and longing. "Remember us. We are lost. Do not forget us." Mara's hands trembled as she closed the journal. "Who are you?" she demanded in a quiver. The silence that followed was more ominous than any reply. Then, from the darkest recesses of the library, a figure emerged, a spectral woman in a long, tattered gown, her expression one of inexplicable sorrow. "I am Adelaide," the apparition whispered, her voice echoing softly as if carried on a wind from another time. "I once hoped for release, but I am forever tethered to these halls by a curse, the curse of forgotten promises and unatoned sins." Tears welled in Mara's eyes. "What must I do to help you?" she asked, her voice trembling with both empathy and fear. Adelaide's spectral form drifted closer, her every step a silent lament. "The asylum feeds on our misery, on the despair that keeps us chained. Only by acknowledging our truth, by bearing witness to our pain, can you begin to dispel the darkness that binds us. But be warned, revealing these secrets can exact a toll that might claim your very soul." Before Mara could fully absorb these words, the asylum groaned as if awakened from a restless slumber. The lights of her flashlight flickered, and long shadows crawled along the walls like dark, living things. The oppressive atmosphere pressed inward, suffocating in its intensity. From the depths of the corridor, a deep, guttural laughter reverberated, a sound devoid of mirth, possessed only of grim foreboding. "Mara, if you continue, there will be no turning back," came Elias's voice from somewhere distant, heavy with despair and warning. "This place does not forgive, nor does it forget." Her resolve hardened like ice within her veins. "I must know," she replied, her voice more defiant than frightened. With Adelaide's spectral hand guiding her, Mara followed the corridor towards a vast chamber at the end of the hall. This room, larger than any she had seen in the asylum, was dominated by a colossal stone archway. Worn by time and etched with enigmatic symbols, the archway pulsed with an unnatural energy that made the very air quiver. As Mara stepped under the archway, a surge of visions overwhelmed her senses, a cacophony of memories not her own. Faces twisted in agony flickered before her eyes. She saw the agony of patients subjected to cruel experiments, their souls reciting silent screams in the void. Dark figures loomed in the periphery of her vision, their eyes hungry for the despair that lingered in the stale air. In the midst of these haunting visions, the original doctor, Dr. Reinhardt, emerged in spectral form. His presence was at once commanding and malevolent, his eyes alight with a cold, remorseless ambition. "Welcome, Seeker," he hissed, his voice as chilling as the winds outside. "You have unlocked what should have remained sealed in silence." Mara's heart pounded so fiercely she could barely breathe. "What do you want from us?" she demanded, her voice echoing off the stone walls as if defying the very darkness. "Doctor," Reinhardt stepped forward, his spectral form casting long shadows. "I do not want, dear child, I demand," he intoned with a sneer. "I demanded from every soul that once languished in this forsaken place, and now I reclaim their voices to feed the void. Sleep is their prison, and through each nightmare, I harvest their sorrow. You too will join the chorus of despair." The temperature plummeted as Dr. Reinhardt's words seeped into Mara's bones. Yet, resolute in her quest for truth, she clutched her journal and faced him head-on. "Your power is rooted in our pain," she declared, her voice echoing with a mixture of defiance and fragile hope. "But perhaps there is power in acknowledging our suffering, a chance to break your hold over us." A malicious smile curled across the doctor's spectral lips. "A deluded notion," he spat. "The sorrow you scrawl in your precious journals, the horror you immortalize in words, they are the lifeblood of my dominion. Every cry, every regret strengthens the chains that bind us here." At that, the chamber shook violently. Dust cascaded from the crumbling ceiling as the spectral figures, lost souls once trapped in endless despair, stirred with renewed determination. Adelaide's voice floated by once again, soft yet resolute. "Your reign of terror ends with the truth. We have suffered too long in silence." As Mara struggled to steady herself amid the chaos, she recalled every story she had ever penned and every nightmare that had ever tormented her sleep, each an echo of a soul yearning for acknowledgement. With trembling resolve, she began to read aloud passages from her journal, words of acceptance, courage, and shared sorrow that transcended her own terror. Her voice, though small, grew stronger with each sentence, resonating throughout the chamber. The ancient stone beneath her feet seemed to vibrate in sympathy, and the spectral forms gathered around, their faces etched with hope rather than despair. Dr. Reinhardt recoiled as if struck by an unseen blow, his malevolent energy wavering for the first time in an age. "No, this cannot be," he bellowed, his voice laced with fury and disbelief. Elias, stepping forward once more, intoned softly, "The past can only haunt us if we remain its prisoners. We must find solace in our shared humanity, in the courage to face our regrets." His eyes met Mara's, and in that gaze there was a silent command, a plea for liberation. As the echoes of Mara's words rippled through the room, the oppressive power of Dr. Reinhardt began to dissolve, his form fading like mist under the morning sun. The wails of the lost souls softened, replaced by a profound stillness, a moment of catharsis. The ancient archway's symbols glowed faintly, as if acknowledging the triumph of honest confession over fabricated terror. For a moment, in the heavy gloom of the forsaken asylum, time itself seemed to pause. A silent acknowledgement that sorrow could indeed be transmuted into something else, the promise of eventual peace. Yet, as the chamber's power waned, Mara felt a lingering sorrow. The release she had triggered was bittersweet. Many souls had been tethered to this place by pain and regret, and though freed from Dr. Reinhardt's grasp, the wounds inflicted by the horrors of the past would never entirely vanish. As Mara stepped away from the chamber, the spectral figures of the asylum, Elias, Adelaide, and countless others, began to fade into peaceful obscurity, their voices quieted by the solace of truth. The oppressive darkness receded, and for the first time in decades, a gentle light broke through the fissured windows, as if the asylum itself exhaled in relief. Outside, as Mara climbed back into her car, the weight of what she had witnessed clung to her like a second skin. The drive away was silent and introspective, the haunted visage of Hallow Ridge Asylum diminished in her rearview mirror, yet its impact remained etched within her soul. She now understood that the darkest horrors were not necessarily crafted by monsters or madmen, but by the cumulative despair of countless lives left unacknowledged, a terror more insidious than any spectral force. In the solitude of her journey, Mara resolved to honor the memories of those lost. Her words, once a conduit for her own nightmares, would now bear witness to the untold anguish and the fragile beauty of redemption. With each keystroke on her typewriter at home, she poured the asylum's sorrow into a legacy of truth, a legacy that might someday help others confront the demons residing not only in haunted corridors, but in the recesses of their own hearts. And so, in the quiet aftermath of terror, as the echoes of a once malevolent past dwindled into silence, Mara embraced the understanding that horror and hope are often intertwined. The asylum's cursed halls had borne witness to too many secrets, but in surrendering its darkest snare to the healing power of truth, its haunted legacy would no longer condemn the souls trapped within.
Story number 3.
The wind howled across the barren moor as twilight bled into night, draping the endless landscape in a shroud of despair. In the distance, the skeletal outline of Ravenmoor House, a decaying manor forsaken by time, loomed like an omen of ruin, its gabled roofs and shattered windows a testament to secrets best left undisturbed. Despite the bitter chill and the pervasive dread of the unknown, Daniel Mercer's curiosity had drawn him here. A history professor by trade and an amateur collector of local legends, he carried with him a desperate need to understand the sorrow and terror that clung to this cursed place. Daniel's car lurched to a stop on the edge of a muddy drive, the headlights barely penetrating the swirling mist. As he stepped out, his boots squelched in the muck, and the air seemed to grow denser, as if laden with memories of a time when laughter filled these now silent corridors. He clutched an aged notebook in one hand and a digital recorder in the other, determined to capture every whisper of history and every echo of the paranormal that Ravenmoor might reveal. Pushing open the heavy iron gate, Daniel entered the overgrown courtyard where nature had claimed its dominion. Ivy strangled the crumbling stone walls, and the once proud fountain lay in ruins, its water long since silenced. He paused to admire a morose statue of a weeping angel at the center, its features eroded by centuries of neglect. A sudden rustling behind him drew his gaze, a raven, jet black against the pallid sky, perched high atop a twisted branch, its eyes glinting with uncanny intelligence. "Welcome," the raven croaked in a voice that resonated deep within Daniel's bones. Startled, he spun around, half expecting an apparition. Yet before he could question further, he found himself staring at the yawning doorway of the mansion. Its threshold beckoned him with an almost magnetic pull, promising revelations and horrors alike. Inside, the grand entrance hall was cloaked in shadows. Daniel lit a small lantern, its feeble glow revealing the ornate decay. The fractured chandeliers, grim portraits of long-departed owners, and elaborate moldings now chipped and blackened by time. Every step he took echoed in the cavernous space, each footfall a drumbeat heralding his intrusion into a world where darkness reigned. "Who disturbs my solitude?" a creaking voice murmured from the far end of the hall. Daniel's pulse quickened. He steadied himself and moved toward the voice, his recorder already rolling. At the end of a long corridor, draped in cobwebs and dust, he encountered a figure. A woman, or what might have once been a woman, stood with back turned, her gown a tattered cascade of lace and sorrow. When she slowly turned to face him, her eyes glowed with an otherworldly luminescence and her lips curled into a mournful smile. "I am Evelyn," she whispered, her voice both gentle and laden with centuries of regret. "I was once the mistress of Ravenmoor House, now I am its keeper of memories." Her spectral presence, though ethereal, exuded a palpable sadness that wrapped around Daniel's heart like cold fingers. "You dare trespass upon our torment, Professor Mercer. Why have you come?" Daniel swallowed hard, his throat parched as if he'd swallowed the moor's ancient dust. "I seek to understand," he replied, his tone a blend of academic inquiry and genuine concern. "I've studied the legends, the accounts of unspeakable grief and inexplicable horror here. I mean you no harm, I only wish to record what remains." Evelyn's eyes clouded with sorrow as she drifted closer, her translucent form quivering in the dim light. "Understanding comes at a terrible price. Here, the past is a living thing, and it hungers for recognition. Every secret you uncover, every sorrow you stir, adds weight to the darkness that resides in these walls." With a frail hand, she gestured toward a grand, ivy-draped staircase that spiraled upward into further gloom. "Follow me, if you are certain, but heed my words. The house and all that it contains is not kind to those who pry too deeply." Compelled by both dread and an insatiable desire for truth, Daniel followed her through long corridors adorned with portraits whose eyes seemed to follow their every step. Their silent faces bore witness to decades of despair, a father mourning a lost son, a bride forever waiting at the altar. and countless others whose lives ended in tragedy. The air grew colder with each step until they reached a parlor preserved as though by a final, desperate attempt at defiance against decay. In the parlor, a grand piano sat in the center, its keys yellowed and cracked. A thick layer of dust covered the room, disturbed only by the occasional scraping of a floorboard that sounded eerily like soft, measured footsteps. Daniel's recorder caught every subtle sound, the faint strains of a long-dead melody mingling with whispered voices. As Evelyn drifted near the piano, an unseen force seemed to stir. "Listen," Evelyn said softly, "to the voices of those who are trapped, whose dreams have hardened into nightmares. They speak in tones of regret and terror, a constant reminder that some wounds never heal." In that moment, the piano's keys began to depress on their own accord, producing a mournful tune that sent shivers racing down Daniel's spine. The melody was both hypnotic and agonizing, evoking images of lost loves, misbegotten sins, and eternal suffering. A sudden, thunderous knock echoed from behind a heavy velvet curtain in the adjacent room. Daniel's heart pounded. He exchanged a worried glance with Evelyn, whose eyes darkened with foreboding. Together they approached the door. Evelyn hesitated before speaking. "That is not the knock of the living." With trembling fingers, Daniel pushed the curtain aside. Within the dimly lit room was an antique mirror, its surface fogged and cracked. In the mirror's depths, a gaunt man stood, his expression twisted in perpetual agony. His eyes were hollow, his skin stretched tight over a skull that seemed more specter than flesh. "Leave this place," he rasped through cracked lips, his voice carrying the weight of endless torment. "For every soul that lingers here has paid a price beyond reckoning." Daniel's voice faltered as he responded, "Who are you?" The mirror rippled, and for a fleeting moment, the man's features contorted into that of a broken child, his tone shifting to a plaintive whisper. "I am Stephen. I sought solace within these walls, but solace was a lie. I embraced darkness, and now darkness devours me." As the image faded, Evelyn's ghostly hand reached for Daniel's arm, pulling him away before more horrors could manifest. "Do not linger on this threshold," she urged softly. "The mirror harbors the culmination of unspeakable desires, fractured souls desperate to reclaim what once was lost." Her words were a warning, a plea that resonated with urgency. Battling an instinct to flee, Daniel instead retreated deeper into the labyrinth of Ravenmore House, with Evelyn as his silent guide. They traversed winding hallways where the boundaries between reality and nightmare dissolved, moving into a library that had once housed prized collections of rare manuscripts. Now, its shelves bore nothing but brittle volumes whose pages whispered stories of anguish and abuse. Amid the dust and decay, Daniel noticed an unusual volume, a diary bound in worn leather with no title. Driven by a mixture of scholarly impulse and an almost compulsive need to understand, he opened the diary. The entries, scrawled in a hurried hand, chronicled the descent of a family into madness. Each day bled into the next, as though time itself had become unmoored. The author wrote of inexplicable events, shadows creeping along walls, murmurs in empty rooms, and the gradual, inexorable toll of sorrow on the living. The final entry was the most disturbing. A frantic missive ending abruptly with the words, "For if you listen too long, the house will speak, and its song is the death knell of all souls." A cold dread overtook Daniel. The diary's narrative seemed too familiar, a mirror of the tragedies that had enveloped Ravenmore House for generations. As he absorbed the grim history, the floor beneath him vibrated with the tremors of a distant, unearthly lament. The walls echoed with voices, rising in a cacophony of moans that swelled to a fevered pitch before abruptly falling silent. "Listen," Evelyn intoned, her eyes brimming with despair as she whispered, "to the tolling of souls that have been consumed by this living nightmare." With that, the entire mansion quaked, the sound like 1,000 grieving hearts beating as one. The recorder in Daniel's hand crackled with static, punctuating the heavy silence with bursts of unintelligible murmurs. It was then, amidst the chaos, that a terrifying presence made itself known. In the grand hall, where time and space warped in ghostly distortion, a figure emerged from the shadows, a colossal, faceless entity draped in tattered robes. Its very being pulsed with malice and an insidious hunger for the pain woven into the foundation of Ravenmore House. Its hands, elongated and skeletal, reached out as if to embrace the living and the dead alike. "You have come to unburden the past," the creature intoned, its voice a guttural rumble that vibrated through every stone of the mansion. But the past is a weight that demands to be carried. Only in surrendering all hope can one ever find absolution. Daniel's mind raced, each word a spark igniting a wildfire of terror and existential dread. Summoning his resolve, Daniel spoke, voice trembling but resolute, "I seek not to release more pain, but to understand it, to give voice to those who have suffered, so that their memories may finally be honored." The creature's form shuddered with a macabre laugh, a sound that mixed cruelty with bitter amusement. "Honor? Understanding?" it scoffed, its eyes, if they could be called that, seeming to pierce the veil of Daniel's soul. In Ravenmoor, every act of understanding binds you closer to the eternal lament. To care is to be ensnared, and to remember is to be damned. With each word, the air grew colder, the walls pulsated with a malevolent energy that threatened to swallow the living whole. Evelyn stepped forward, her translucent figure radiating a soft yet desperate light. "Your reign of despair has gone on long enough," she whispered fiercely. "These souls have been imprisoned in your web of suffering, unable to break free. Daniel has given them a chance to be heard, and in that truth there lies salvation." The faceless entity recoiled, its form flickering as though the light of Evelyn's conviction weakened its dominion. A tumultuous struggle ensued, not just of spectral wills, but of the collective sorrows of every trapped soul that had ever known this cursed place. The manor itself trembled as ancient energies clashed, the very floorboards splitting under the strain of spectral agony and hope intertwined. In that maelstrom of despair and defiance, Daniel's recorder captured a final, shattering moment. A symphony of cries, whispers, and the relentless beating of a heart freed from its torment. The monstrous presence shrieked, its voice echoing into the void as if being torn apart. Light erupted from every corner of the hall, and the oppressive gloom lifted, if only for a heartbeat. The spectral chains that had long bound the souls in Ravenmoor began to crumble, their mournful ties dissolving into nothingness. When the tumult subsided, Evelyn's spectral eyes were filled with bittersweet relief. "For a moment, at least, the voices have been set free," she murmured, a flicker of melancholy in her tone. Daniel, breathing hard and shivering, despite the dissipating cold, felt an overwhelming responsibility settle upon him. He knew that the story he had uncovered was both a chronicle of unspeakable horror and a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a reminder that even in the darkest shadows, compassion could ignite a beacon of hope. As he retraced his steps out of Ravenmoor House, the estate seemed less hostile, if still burdened with its tragic legacy. The raven, its eyes now softer yet still enigmatic, cawed overhead, as if bidding him a cautious farewell. Daniel drove away slowly, every mile taking him further from the manor's haunted embrace, yet the echoes of Ravenmoor's lament would forever haunt his dreams. In his notebook, amidst pages of frantic scribbles and spectral recordings, he had preserved the legacy of a family of lost souls, their voices a reminder that even the gravest of terrors could be met with an act of remembrance. In the solitude of his study, Daniel listened once more to the final moments recorded that night, a symphony of agony, hope, and defiance that reverberated with the unyielding truth that sometimes the most terrifying nightmares are the ones we inherit from the past. With a heavy heart and a mind forever changed, he resolved to transcribe these tales for the world to remember, so that no soul would fade into oblivion without a final, mournful plea for justice.
Story number 4.
The night was frigid and unyielding as a full moon cast its milky light over the sprawling, derelict estate of Blackwood Grange. Tucked away in a forgotten valley, the manor loomed like a brooding sentinel, a relic of opulence turned into a crucible of anguish and despair. It was here, amid centuries of whispered secrets and unspeakable tragedies, that Simon Hargrove found himself drawn by a compulsion he could not fathom. Simon had long been a skeptic, a man of reason and meticulous research. As a journalist with an insatiable hunger for uncovering the unvarnished truth behind local legends, he had written countless exposés on urban myths and haunted locales, yet nothing in his storied career had prepared him for the horror that lay within Blackwood Grange. The estate's reputation was that of relentless torment, a place where dreams turned to nightmares and where every creaking floorboard and echoing sigh bore the weight of souls long condemned. Parking his battered sedan on a weed-choked drive, Simon stepped out into the biting wind. The grass whispered like a congregation of lost memories as he advanced toward the heavy oak doors, each step stirring a latent feeling of dread he could not ignore. The manor's exterior was defiant against decay. Ivy strangled its crumbling stone walls, and fractured gargoyles towered from its eaves, their menacing visages frozen in eternal grimace. A solitary lantern trembled in his hand as he pushed open the door, which groaned in protest. Inside, the grand foyer was shrouded in darkness, punctuated only by the intermittent glow of moonlight piercing through fractured stained glass. The floor was a mosaic of shattered dreams, broken tiles that told their own stories of neglect and agony. As he made his way further into the building, a mournful echo of footsteps accompanied him, though Simon was alone, or so he thought. "Who dares disturb our sorrowful slumber?" a voice rasped from somewhere in the gloom. Simon halted, his heart pounding with an instinctual terror. From behind a veil of tattered drapes, a gaunt figure emerged. Her eyes, hollow and despairing, were heavy with the burden of many lost years. "I am Margot," the spectre intoned in a voice as brittle as dry parchment. "Once I was the mistress of Blackwood Grange. Now I am its eternal mourner." Simon's rational mind wavered in the presence of such undeniable sorrow. "I come seeking the truth behind the legends," he said, voice quivering despite his determined facade. "I wish to understand why you linger, why this place has been cursed with unrelenting pain." Margot's expression contorted with a mix of pity and warning. "The truth," she whispered, "is a curse in itself. Here, every secret is bound by blood and regret. We are all prisoners of our past misdeeds, a debt that cannot be repaid by mere mortal inquiry." She drifted closer, the chill of her presence mingling with the cold air of the forsaken hall. "If you choose to learn, know that the darkness here demands a toll. The more you uncover, the more it clamors for your soul." Despite the dread that seeped into his bones, Simon persisted. He recalled the hours he had spent poring over dusty manuscripts and whispered accounts about Blackwood Grange. The legends spoke of a terrible betrayal, a family shattered by greed and despair, whose unspoken sins had summoned a malevolent force that feasted on grief. The stories were too numerous to ignore, each account a lament for a lost spirit, trapped in an endless cycle of torment. Guided by Margot's spectral hand, Simon ventured deeper into the manor. They wound their way through long corridors lined with portraits whose eyes followed their every move. Each painting was a frozen testimony of a life abruptly ended, the subject's silent screams begging for reprieve from their everlasting prison. In one particularly haunting portrait, a young man's face was twisted in anguish, his eyes seeming to plead silently for salvation. They arrived at a grand parlor, its opulence long faded into a tapestry of decay. A massive chandelier lay shattered on the floor, its crystals scattered like tears beneath the weight of history. An ancient grand piano dominated the far wall, its keys marred by time. As if compelled by the force of memory itself, Margot reached out and pressed one of the keys. A single, mournful note rang out, reverberating through the void like a dirge to lost souls. The sound awakened something within the manor. From the darkest corners emerged shadowy figures, their forms barely discernible as they materialized, drawn to the plaintive melody. A cacophony of hushed whispers filled the room, the voices of the damned, each reciting their own tale of sorrow and regret. One among them, a male figure cloaked in tatters, stepped forward. "We have long awaited one who would dare peer into our anguish," he declared, his voice a blend of bitter resentment and forlorn acceptance. Simon's recorder, clenched tightly in his hand, began capturing every spectral utterance. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice echoing off the marred walls. "What do you want from us?" The specter's eyes, hollow yet wise, met his. "We are the legacy of Blackwood," he said slowly, each syllable weighted with centuries of agony. "Our lives were undone by the greed and treachery of our own blood. The darkness that prowls these halls is not just a force of nature, but the collective sorrow of those whose hearts were shattered beyond repair. And in your quest for truth, you risk becoming another chapter in our cursed chronicle." The words hung heavy in the air as the room's atmosphere turned oppressively dense. Simon's initial resolve began to falter, yet his curiosity and professional duty propelled him forward. In the back of the parlor, a narrow doorway beckoned with an almost hypnotic allure. "This way," Margot murmured softly. "Within lies the heart of our despair, and perhaps the key to ending this endless night." With trepidation, Simon followed her through the doorway into what appeared to be a long-forgotten study. Shelves crammed with brittle tomes lined the walls, and an ancient desk stood as the lone sentinel of hidden truths. On the desk rested a diary, its leather cover cracked and worn. The diary belonged to Alexander Blackwood, the patriarch whose ambition had precipitated the fall of his lineage. Every page chronicled a slow descent into madness, a life marked by treachery, cruelty, and the insatiable hunger for power. Alexander's final entry was the most chilling. "I have awakened the darkness within us. No forgiveness shall be granted, only eternal torment until we are devoured by our own sins." Before Simon could fully absorb Alexander's confessions, the study's temperature plummeted, and the walls seemed to breathe with malignant intent. The air vibrated with the mournful cadence of disembodied voices, each word carrying a promise of eternal retribution. The diary's pages fluttered open on their own, as though compelled by an unseen force. In those pages, Simon found a series of cryptic symbols and incantations, a ritual meant to bind, or perhaps to set free, the damning curse that had long plagued the Blackwood family. Margot's gaze shifted, sorrowful and conflicted. "The ritual was meant to sever the ties that bind us to this suffering," she explained softly. "But power, when twisted by guilt, often turns upon its caster. Alexander sought dominion over our souls, and in his hubris unleashed a horror that defies the boundaries of mortal pain." A formidable crash of thunder shook the ancient estate, and the study's door slammed shut with a deafening force. Simon's heart raced as he fumbled to secure his recorder, his logical mind now battered by an avalanche of instinctual terror. Outside, the wind wailed like a chorus of grieving souls, and the manor itself seemed to groan in lament. Determined to forge ahead despite the mounting terror, Simon began deciphering the ritual's inscriptions. Each symbol glowed faintly as his trembling fingers traced over them. As he spoke the incantations in a desperate bid to understand their meaning, the room darkened further, and spectral shapes began to swirl around him. The incantation was a key, a linguistic lock to the ancient secret that had cursed the Blackwood name. In that moment, a booming voice roared through the room, a voice not belonging to any spectral being, but echoing from the very foundations of the manor. "You have trespassed into realms reserved for the damned," it thundered. The ground beneath Simon's feet shuddered, splitting open to reveal a chasm of swirling darkness. From the abyss, a monstrous form emerged, a towering, malformed amalgamation of shifting shadows and anguished faces, its eyes two hollow pits of despair. "Alexander's sin has manifested," Margot cried out, her voice a blend of terror and resignation. "He is the embodiment of our collective guilt, a specter of eternal retribution, doomed to wander these halls until the weight of our regrets is absolved." Simon stared in paralyzed horror as the abomination advanced, its tendrils reaching out to ensnare him. What do you want?" he managed to choke out. The creature's reply was a whisper that resonated in every fiber of his being. "I hunger for the truth and the sorrow that births it. Your curiosity has unearthed the gravest of all secrets. There is no escape from the legacy of Blackwood." As the creature's looming presence threatened to crush him, Simon's mind raced. In his fervent research and the desperate need to unveil hidden truths, he had unwittingly become entangled in a cosmic dance of suffering and retribution. Summoning every last shred of courage, he clutched the diary and spoke again the incantation, his voice quavering but defiant. "I acknowledge every sin, every drop of sorrow that has stained these halls. I bear witness to your pain, and in that acknowledgement I seek to break the cycle of torment." The entity recoiled as if struck by a force beyond its malign will. The cavernous abyss seemed to tremble with a mingling of fury and disbelief. Margot's spectral form glowed with an otherworldly light, and around them the trapped souls, each a fragment of unhealed anguish, began to rise as one. Their voices, once marred by despair, now resonated in a chorus of catharsis and release. "You must now choose," the entity hissed with diminishing power, "to embrace the eternal night of sorrow or to accept the absolution that comes from remembrance and forgiveness." Simon's heart ached as he weighed the burden of endless torment against the promise of a fragile redemption. His voice, though barely audible, carried unwavering resolve. "I choose to remember, and in remembering, I choose to forgive." The incantation vibrated through the manor, a final plea that resonated with every tortured soul. The monstrous presence roared in agony as spectral light exploded outward, consuming the darkness with blinding intensity. In that luminous moment, the chasm closed, and the oppressive curse that had bound Blackwood Grange for generations began to unravel. When the light subsided, the manor was left in a mournful calm. The phantom figures faded into gentle silence, and Margot's sorrowful gaze softened into a semblance of peace. The abominable entity had vanished, leaving behind only the hollow echo of regret, now tempered by the possibility of healing. Outside, in the blackness of the valley, Simon stepped out of the manor. The night air was still, as if the world itself paused to catch its breath after a prolonged cry of anguish. The full moon shone down like a silent guardian, and the once ominous visage of Blackwood Grange now appeared less as a temple of horror and more as a relic finally granted a measure of release. Simon's recorder had captured every haunting whisper, every anguished cry, a testament to a legacy that had been both monstrous and mournful. Though the horrors he witnessed would forever be seared into his mind, he now understood that even the deepest darkness can yield a sliver of light when met with the courage to remember, to forgive, and to honor the pain of those who came before. In the bittersweet aftermath of that fateful night, Simon vowed to tell the true story of Blackwood Grange, not as a tale of unending terror, but as a testament to the power of remembrance and the hope that even in the bleakest corridors of the human soul, redemption might be found.
Story number 5.
The autumn rain fell in relentless sheets as night cloaked the small town of Dunridge, a place whispered about in hushed tones over flickering campfires and trembling bedsides. In the heart of these murmured legends lay the old Greystone Farm, a forsaken homestead hidden in a tangle of withered oak and silver birch trees. For decades, it had been the subject of local lore, a place where nightmares spilled into waking hours, where doors slammed shut by unseen hands, and where the very walls exhaled centuries of grief and wrath. Tonight, a solitary traveler named Lydia Cross would come to learn that some rumors bear the weight of truth. Lydia's journey had been unplanned, a detour born of insomnia and relentless curiosity. A photojournalist by trade with a penchant for the macabre, she had roamed many haunted places in search of the stories that lurked beneath layers of dust and time. But nothing had prepared her for the raw dread that awaited at Greystone Farm. Driving along a single narrow road that wound deeper into dark woods, she recalled the warnings of locals. Never approach the farm after dark, for its secrets were hungry, and they roamed unchecked when the moon was hidden by a shroud of clouds. Parking her aging sedan at the crumbling iron gate, Lydia hesitated before stepping out. The gate, wrought with rust and twisted vines, groaned as if protesting its eternal duty to bar entry. A chill seeped into her bones as she crossed the threshold. Each step toward the looming farmhouse evoked the quiet thud of her own heartbeat, a rhythmic counterpoint to the distant chorus of nocturnal creatures. The wind's mournful whistle through the barren fields felt like the lament of a soul long lost. Before the farmhouse came into full view, Lydia discovered a battered wooden sign pinned to a splintered post. Its faded letters spelled out nothing more than a single word: hollow. Shivers crawled over her skin as she read the word aloud in a trembling voice: hollow. The sign swung in the wind as though confirming its grim message. Gritting her teeth against a rising tide of apprehension, Lydia decided she must find out what lay hidden within. The front door of Greystone Farm, heavy and scarred by time, creaked open with an almost imperceptible push. Inside, a thick silence reigned, broken only by the patter of falling rain echoing through the deserted halls. Dust motes danced in the sporadic shafts of moonlight that fought to penetrate the grimy windows. Lydia's footsteps resonated against the creaking wooden floor as she moved cautiously through the entryway, each sound magnified in the oppressive stillness. "Hello?" she called, voice low and uncertain. The sound died in the stale air. Room after room she ventured, discovering traces of lives long extinguished. A tattered armchair, a clock halted at midnight, and portraits whose eyes seemed to follow her every move. In one parlor, a cracked mirror framed by ornate gilt had the uncanny property of reflecting not only her own anxious face, but the ghostly silhouettes of figures standing silently behind her. Startled, Lydia spun around, but found nothing in the empty corners of the room. It wasn't long before she encountered the first voice, a hoarse whisper that seemed to float just behind her ear. "You shouldn't be here," it rasped, laden with sorrow and warning. Lydia's heart pounded in her ears as she strained to find its source. "Who's there?" she demanded, trying to steady her voice. The sound shifted, echoing from a shadowed corridor lined with peeling wallpaper and remnants of decayed wallpaper patterns. Summoning every ounce of courage, she followed the phantom murmur. At the far end of the corridor, where the light dimmed to an almost suffocating gloom, Lydia came upon a small, neglected sitting room. A single armchair, draped in cobwebs, faced a large fireplace long cold and empty. Here, in the brittle silence, a figure emerged from the darkness. A woman, scarcely more than a wisp of memory, dressed in garments that belonged to another era. The spectral woman's eyes were two deep pools of anguish, and her mouth was a silent plea. "I am Clara," she murmured, voice barely more than the rustle of dry leaves. "I have been waiting for someone to listen to us." Lydia's throat constricted as she struggled to respond. "Listen? Who are you waiting for?" she asked, feeling the weight of an unspeakable sorrow pressing against her chest. Clara's gaze drifted to the fire, and for a moment the specter's face was etched with untold grief. "I am but one of many voices trapped here in the hollow," Clara whispered. "Our past is a tapestry of despair, woven by tragedy and guilt. We could not escape Greystone's curse, for it feeds on our sorrow." Before Lydia could ask more, a sudden gust of wind slammed the front door behind her. The resulting crash reverberated through the halls like a death knell, and the temperature plummeted. Shadows twisted on the walls, and the whispering grew louder, a cacophony of longing and regret rising to a fevered pitch. Lydia's recorder, which she had clutched tightly in one hand, began to capture garbled, indistinct voices that seemed both near and far at once. "I must know," Lydia said, her voice trembling despite her determination. "What happened here?" Her question was met by a chorus of disembodied replies, a mixture of murmurs and half-cries that filled the room with a palpable dread. "We did not choose this fate," one voice lamented, then another countered. Then another countered, "The sins of our ancestors, the betrayal and the cruelty, they condemned us to endless torment." Their words echoed as though delivered by an unseen jury, sentencing them to the confines of eternal night. Clara's translucent form flickered uncertainly, and she beckoned Lydia deeper into the farmhouse with a frail, trembling hand. "Come with me," Clara urged, "and I will show you our story." With no path but the one laid out in those sorrowful eyes, Lydia reluctantly followed her spectral guide down a narrow stairway that spiraled into a blackened basement. Each step echoed with the anguish of forgotten souls, the sound melding with the soft weeping of unseen entities. The basement was a labyrinthine chamber of horrors, a repository of relics and records preserved in decay. Faded newspapers, handwritten diaries, and shattered relics of a bygone era were strewn about in chaotic disarray. In the center of this musty crypt stood a large wooden table, its surface scarred by deep gouges and dark, smoldering stains. Clara stopped before the table and gestured to a series of journals stacked neatly in one corner. "These are the accounts of our suffering," she intoned. "Here you will find our confessions, our love, and our betrayal." Lydia reached for one of the journals, its leather cover worn smooth by countless desperate hands. As she flipped through the fragile pages, she discovered a story of family, honor, and a tragedy that spanned generations. The diary belonged to a man named Jonathan Greystone, the long-forgotten patriarch of the estate. His entries told a tale of twisted ambition and the moral collapse of a family whose members had been driven by greed and the thirst for power. Jonathan had once been a respected member of the community, but his obsession with preserving his family's legacy had led him to commit unspeakable acts, a betrayal so profound that it unleashed a curse upon them all. His final entry ended abruptly with a hastily scrawled warning: "Beware the hollow, for its hungry heart will devour you whole." A sudden, anguished cry rose from somewhere deep within the basement, a sound that made Lydia's blood run cold. The cry was joined by a chorus of tormented wails that resonated through the stone walls and chilled the very marrow of her bones. Clara's form grew more insubstantial, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and sorrow. "They have not rested for decades," the ghostly woman murmured. "Every night, the hunger in the hollow grows stronger. It is not content with the despair of the past. It craves the fresh anguish of the living." Before Lydia could process these words, the ground beneath her feet shuddered violently, as though the house itself was awakening from a long, bitter slumber. The journals on the table fluttered open as if caught in an invisible draft, their pages rifling through the narrative of sin and retribution. A spectral figure, more menacing than any before, manifested near the center of the room. It was a tall, gaunt man with eyes like smoldering embers, a face carved from malice and regret. His voice boomed through the chamber. "Who dares disturb the slumber of the damned? Who invites the hollow to awaken?" Lydia clutched the journal to her chest as a force of icy terror seized her limbs, making it difficult to stand. "I only wish to uncover the truth," she stuttered, her voice lost amid the chorus of agonized whispers. The man's spectral gaze fixed upon her, and his expression twisted into one of bitter scorn. "Truth," he sneered. "The truth is a poison here, infecting the hearts of those who would seek to rewrite the past. You step into our lives, our memories, and you will forever be stained by our sorrow." In that moment, every emotion, every regret, every unhealed wound within the farmhouse began to surge. Shadows converged like a tidal wave of despair, threatening to engulf Lydia in their relentless fury. Amid the chaos, Clara's presence remained a solitary beacon of mourning compassion. "Listen to him no longer," Clara cried, her voice wavering with inner torment. "For we are not our sins. We are victims of a chain of cruelty spun long ago, and our pain, though deep, can be eased through acknowledgement." But the entity whose name was lost to time and whose essence embodied the malediction of Greystone Farm would not relent. "Your sympathy is a mockery," it bellowed, its voice reverberating off ancient stone. "There is no escape from the hollow. Every soul drawn here is bound to share in our eternal suffering." Tears mingled with the grime on Lydia's face as she realized that the farm's curse was not confined solely to those who once lived within its walls. It extended to anyone who dared pry too deeply into its torment. Yet, in spite of the paralyzing dread, a flicker of defiance kindled within her. "I will not be silenced by fear," she declared, voice trembling but growing more resolute. "I will tell your story, not to trap you further in darkness, but to free you from the chains of forgotten sorrow." Her words, uttered with a fierce determination born of desperation and empathy, resonated in the oppressive gloom like a rallying cry. As if in response, the hollow shuddered violently. The monstrous spirit recoiled momentarily, and a sudden hush descended over the chamber, a fragile pause in the endless lament. In that silence, the tortured voices seemed to hesitate, as if uncertain whether they, too, might be offered a chance at reprieve. Clara's translucent hand reached out to Lydia, guiding her toward a narrow doorway at the back of the basement. "There is a way," Clara whispered urgently, "but it demands courage beyond measure. You must retrace the steps of our darkest hour, the ritual that bound our souls, and offer a penance for the sins that continue to haunt these halls." Lydia's eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and grim resolve as she stepped forward, leaving behind the scattered pages of despair to follow her spectral guide. The passage opened into a circular chamber adorned with archaic symbols etched into the stone floor, each mark pulsating faintly in tune with a heartbeat that was not entirely human. In the center of the room was a shallow basin carved out of the rock, filled with water that shimmered with an unnatural, eerie luminescence. Along the walls, faded murals depicted scenes of fire and anguish, images of betrayal, of lust for power, and of the inevitable retribution that followed. A heavy silence reigned as Clara explained, "This basin once held the water of absolution, a key to breaking the bond of our suffering. Long ago, a ritual was performed here by a soul burdened by guilt and remorse, an act of contrition meant to set us free from the curse of the hollow. But that act was halted by the wicked, and ever since, the darkness has festered, feeding on our unconfessed sins." Her voice broke with sorrow as she continued, "If you can replicate that ritual, if you can offer a confession so honest that it burns away the layers of deceit and guilt, there is hope that the hollow can be silenced." Lydia's mind raced. The notion of confessing her own darkest secrets in such a cursed sanctuary terrified her, yet she recognized that to voice the truth was to reclaim a piece of her power. In a trembling voice, she recounted memories of past failures, of regrets buried beneath the weight of her ambition and personal loss. Every word was a shard of her soul laid bare, echoing through the chamber and mingling with the spectral chorus that had long been silenced by despair. As her confession reached its end, the water in the basin began to glow brighter, and the etched symbols seemed to vibrate with a hopeful energy. For a moment, the oppressive presence of the hollow wavered, as though the very foundation of its power was being questioned by the raw truth of one human soul. Then, with a force that shook the stone beneath their feet, the spirit roared its defiance one final time. "You dare challenge me?" it bellowed, its voice tearing through the silence. "No mortal confession can undo centuries of retribution." But the ground trembled, and a shimmering beam of pale light pierced the gloom from an unseen source above. In that radiant moment, as if the heavens themselves had lent their grace to Lydia's earnest confession, the spirit's form began to disintegrate. The swirling mass of darkness unraveled into countless motes of shadow that lifted upward, dissolving into the ether as a chorus of sighs, equal parts relief and sorrow, filled the chamber. For several agonizing minutes, Lydia and Clara stood in the light, feeling the weight of the past slowly lift from the air. The water in the basin stilled, its eerie luminescence softening into a gentle glow that bathed the chamber in a quiet, almost sacred radiance. The oppressive curse that had bound Greystone Farm for so long began to ebb, as if the truth and the confession had finally opened a channel for healing. Lydia, though trembling and forever changed by what she had witnessed and endured, felt a new determination rising within her. She had not only uncovered the untold horror of the Hollow, but had played a part in its undoing, however small it might be. The spectral voices, once so desperate and mournful, now receded into the silence like a fading echo of a long-forgotten nightmare. Slowly, Clara's form grew fainter, her sorrowful eyes softening into a semblance of peace. "Thank you," she whispered, voice echoing like distant bells. "Your truth has set us free." With that final word, the ghostly figure of the old caretaker dissolved into the ambient light, leaving Lydia alone in the chamber, but not lonely. The burdens of Greystone Farm, the voices of the damned and the tortured souls, had found a moment of release, a quiet end to their long night of despair. Emerging from the basement and stepping back into the cold, rain-washed night, Lydia looked up at the newly clearing skies. The oppressive gloom of Greystone Farm no longer seemed like a prison of perpetual torment, but a place where the scars of a tragic past might, in time, heal. In her battered notebook and trembling recordings, she carried with her not only the story of unspeakable horrors, but also a poignant reminder of the redemptive power of truth. A truth that once spoken can dispel the darkest of curses. As she climbed back into her car, engine sputtering to life, Lydia glanced once more at the looming silhouette of Greystone Farm. In that final glance, she saw not a monument to fear, but a somber relic of lessons learned and souls finally at rest. With her hands trembling on the steering wheel, she drove away into the misty dawn, carrying the echoes of the Hollow with her, a legacy of both sorrow and hope.
Story number 6.
The wind screamed through the barren pines as dusk faded into an impenetrable night, blanketing the ancient woodlands of Hollow's End. In the midst of these gnarled trees stood a derelict mansion known to locals as Morrow's Grove, a place shunned by everyone who valued their sanity. For decades, rumors had circled about this estate, whispers of unexplainable disappearances, unnerving sounds in the dead of night, and sightings of figures that should not exist. Tonight, Marcus Delaney, a seasoned photographer with a dark past, felt inexplicably drawn to the ominous structure. He had spent his life chasing truth through the lens, convinced that each photograph could capture secrets beyond mortal understanding. But nothing could have prepared him for the horror that awaited within those crumbling walls. Marcus's car spluttered to a stop on an overgrown driveway, where jagged stones and wild vines reclaimed what once was a manicured path. As he stepped out, the cold autumn air stung his face. His breath plumed before him, and the trees around him seemed to whisper in low, discordant voices, their ancient branches swaying in a grotesque dance. Determined yet apprehensive, Marcus hefted his heavy camera bag and made his way toward Morrow's Grove. The mansion loomed ahead, a decaying monstrosity shrouded in shadows. Its once grand facade was scarred by time. Ivy strangled the broken stone, and boarded-up windows resembled blind eyes peering into a dark soul. With each hesitant step, Marcus felt the presence of unseen watchers. His every instinct screamed caution, yet something deep inside urged him forward, promising redemption for his long-troubled past if he could simply document the truth hidden here. Pushing open the warped front door, Marcus was greeted by a shock of cold air and the cloying odor of decay mixed with forgotten grief. The grand entrance hall, once alive with laughter and light, now lay in silent ruin. Dusty chandeliers hung like spectral fossils from the high ceiling, and portraits in elaborate frames stared vacantly, their painted eyes filled with sorrowful secrets. His flashlight beam quivered over peeling wallpaper and ornate moldings that hinted at a long-forgotten elegance swallowed by time. As Marcus ventured deeper into the mansion, each echoing footstep on the creaking floorboards reinforced the unnerving solitude. He paused in the foyer as a faint sound, almost like the soft cry of a child, drifted from the upper floor. "Hello?" he called, his voice nearly swallowed by the vast emptiness. For a moment, silence reigned, heavy and oppressive, broken only by a distant sound, a faint shudder of movement behind a narrow doorway. Steeling himself, Marcus approached the room. The door was ajar, revealing a narrow staircase leading upward. As he ascended, the temperature dropped precipitously. Every step stirred a cloud of dust and memories, and a chilling draft whispered through the corridor. At the top, the hall stretched out like a labyrinth of doorways and secret alcoves. It was there that he first encountered her, a spectral young woman standing by a large, cracked mirror. She was dressed in a faded white gown, her hair unkempt, and her eyes, strikingly sad, gazed directly into Marcus's. "Who are you?" he asked, his tone blending curiosity with growing dread. Her voice, soft and tinged with melancholy, answered as if from a far-off memory. "I am Elise," she murmured. "I was once bound to this place, just as you may soon be." Her eyes flickered with a mixture of warning and longing. "Leave, if you value your soul." Marcus's pulse quickened, but his journalistic instinct urged him to press on. "Why warn me? What happened here?" he demanded, stepping closer despite the icy fear gripping his heart. Elise's form wavered like a reflection in disturbed water. "Morrow's Grove is a prison for broken dreams and irreversible sins. It is a repository of all the horrors that were never allowed to die." Her voice trembled as she continued. "Those who trespass, who linger, become part of the endless cycle of despair and torment. I remain here because I, too, could not leave behind the guilt of my untimely fate." Her words clung to Marcus's mind as he wandered into a long-forgotten parlor. In the dim light, he discovered relics of happier times, a tarnished silver tea set, faded photographs in cracked frames, and a small music box on a mantel that had long ceased to play its gentle lullaby. The atmosphere was oppressive, laden with palpable grief, as if every object carried within it a fragment of a tragedy too profound to explain. "I used to belong here," whispered a second voice, coming from the shadows behind an overstuffed armchair. Marcus spun around, his camera raised instinctively. In the gloom emerged an older man in tattered clothes, his face lined with anguish and regret. "I am Thomas," he said softly. "I once vowed to protect my family within these walls, but betrayal and madness claimed us all. Now I am condemned to wander these halls, forever reliving the night of our ruin." As Thomas spoke, the temperature seemed to drop further. A heavy silence fell over the room until, with an almost imperceptible tremor, the old man's voice took on a tremulous intensity. "Beware, Marcus. You must not disturb the balance here. Every truth you unveil, every secret you force into the light, only deepens the darkness that festers behind these walls." Doubt and determination warred within Marcus as he continued his exploration. He filmed, took photographs, and scribbled frantic notes in his battered journal. Every room he entered revealed layers of horror. A library filled with journals detailing family curses and dreadful rituals. A ballroom where ghostly figures danced in silent agony beneath shattered crystal. Corridors lined with faded, desperate scribblings accusing unseen forces of malevolence. It was in the mansion's heart, a dank underground chapel, where Marcus discovered the gravity of the curse that shackled the estate. The chapel was a macabre mosaic of despair, its walls adorned with cryptic symbols and grotesque murals depicting scenes of torment and eternal damnation. At the altar stood a massive iron-bound tome, its pages brittle with the weight of forbidden lore. As Marcus gingerly approached the altar, a deep, resonant voice echoed from the shadows behind him. "Curiosity is a dangerous gift." The voice was neither male nor female, but carried a timbre of raw power and ancient sorrow. Marcus turned slowly and beheld a towering figure draped in tattered ceremonial robes, its face obscured by a hood. Only piercing eyes shone from beneath, eyes that burned with a cold, remorseless fury. "Why do you disturb our sanctuary?" the figure demanded. Marcus's heart pounded so fiercely he thought his pulse might shatter the oppressive silence. I only seek to understand, he stammered, struggling to maintain his composure. I want to expose the truth behind these legends. A bitter laugh, like the crackling of dry leaves underfoot, reverberated through the chapel. Truth, the cloaked figure said, voice echoing in the vaulted space, is not always a gift. Here, truth is a curse. It binds you to the suffering of those who cannot rest. Slowly, the figure advanced toward Marcus, each step measured and inexorable. Every secret you uncover adds to the agony that permeates these halls. The sorrow of those left behind will become your own. Marcus's mind raced with images, faces contorted in eternal anguish, voices crying out in torment, and a darkness so profound it threatened to engulf him entirely. Yet, as the figure loomed over him, an inner resolve crystallized. I will not be swayed by fear, Marcus declared, his voice quivering but defiant. I will bear witness to your truth and show the world what has been forgotten. A shiver ran through the ancient stones of the chapel. The cloaked figure halted and regarded him with an inscrutable gaze. Very well, it intoned solemnly. But know this, once the curse is unveiled, there is no retreat. Your soul will be intertwined with the fate of this forsaken place. A series of muffled sobs filled the air, as if the very walls exhaled a final, heart-wrenching lament. In that moment, a torrent of spectral memories surged before Marcus's eyes. A vision of a family reduced to despair by treachery, of innocence lost in madness, of rites performed in desperation beneath a blood-red moon. Each image was accompanied by desperate, pleading voices that cried out into the void, their sorrow and regret coalescing into a single, unbearable weight. Determined to capture every fragment of this harrowing reality, Marcus raised his camera and snapped photo after photo, each flash a futile attempt to document the ineffable horror before him. But with every shutter click, the visions deepened, as if the mansion itself were reaching into him to share its anguished legacy. His hands trembled, his breath came in short gasps, yet amid the chaos of images and screams, he felt, paradoxically, a sense of purpose. The night stretched on in a surreal tapestry of terror and revelation. Marcus discovered a hidden chamber behind a false wall in the mansion's east wing, a sanctuary of despair where the remnants of a ritual lay scattered. Candles, long extinguished but still arranged with meticulous care, encircled an altar smeared with dried blood. Faded letters and cryptic symbols adorned the walls in a frantic script of regret and madness. It was there that he found the final piece of the puzzle, the confession of Marianne Morrow, the matriarch whose unquenchable ambition had ignited the catastrophic curse. Her trembling script revealed a dark pact forged in desperation, a bargain with forces beyond mortal ken, and a promise of penance that was never fulfilled. "Forgive me," read Marianne's final words, scrawled hastily in the margins. "For my pride has condemned us all to endless night." With that, a heavy silence fell, as though the mansion paused to grieve the sins of its past. Driven by a mixture of horror and a desperate need for catharsis, Marcus gathered the scattered documents and began to piece together the tragic mosaic of Morrow's Grove. As he deciphered the words and symbols, the oppressive atmosphere shifted subtly, the suffocating dread giving way to the faintest hint of release. It was as if, by acknowledging the unspeakable atrocities committed here, he had begun to ease the relentless grip of the curse. But even as hope flickered, a final, spine-chilling challenge emerged. The cloaked figure reappeared at the far end of the chamber, its eyes burning brighter than before. "You have seen what must not be forgotten," it intoned, voice resonating with ancient authority. "Now, you must choose. Do you embrace this truth and bear its burden, or do you flee and leave the souls trapped here to suffer in silence?" Marcus's heart pounded in his ears as he weighed the enormity of that ultimatum. He recalled every anguished scream, every tear-stained confession, and every ghostly whisper that had haunted him throughout the night. In that crucible of despair, he recognized that his path was irrevocably entwined with the legacy of Morrow's Grove. His duty was to expose the horror, to let the world know of the darkness that had festered unchecked for so long, even if the cost was his own eternal torment. With a voice steadier than he felt, Marcus answered, "I choose to remember. I choose to face the darkness if that is what it takes to free these souls and to show the world that the past is never truly dead." At his declaration, the chamber shuddered violently. The cloying presence of malevolent energy convulsed through the walls, then slowly, inexorably began to recede. The cloaked figure's form flickered, as though it struggled between fading into nothingness and clinging desperately to its ancient dominion. In one last, echoing whisper, it said, "Then you shall carry our sorrow with you, and may the truth guide you through the endless night." A profound silence followed, the kind that descended after a storm when nature itself seems to exhale its grief. Marcus stood alone amid the ruins of despair, and his heart heavy with the burden of untold tragedy, but ignited with the fierce purpose of a man who had witnessed the unvarnished truth. Slowly, he gathered his equipment and the remnants of Marianne's testimony, determined to leave Morrow's Grove with not only evidence but with the memory of every tormented soul who had once called it home. As the first hints of dawn bled into the horizon, Marcus stepped out into the cold light of morning. The mansion's ominous silhouette receded behind him like a dark secret, one that he had now vowed to share with the world. In his photographs lay the silent screams of the lost and the ignited hope of redemption. Yet, even as he drove away on the lonely country road, the voices of Morrow's Grove followed him, a constant reminder that some truths cling to the soul, whispering in the quiet moments between waking and sleep. Marcus knew that his life, and the lives of those who would witness his work, could never be the same. But in the heart of darkness he had found a singular, unyielding light, the courage to remember, the strength to unburden the past, and the conviction that even the deepest sorrow might eventually yield to the healing power of truth.
Story number 7.
A bitter wind cut through the barren fields as dusk settled over the derelict grounds of an old carnival, known to the locals as the Midnight Carnival. For decades, its faded neon sign and rusted attractions had been shrouded in sinister rumors, whispers of vanished souls, restless laughter echoing after midnight, and an ancient curse that trapped the wicked and the broken. Tonight, Sarah Reeves, a determined investigative journalist with eyes too curious for her own good, found herself drawn to this forsaken playground of nightmares. Sarah had first heard of the Midnight Carnival during a long, rain-sodden interview in a back room of a small diner in a remote town. The old man behind the counter spoke in a trembling voice of a time when the carnival's vivid colors danced under starlight and children's laughter filled the air. But that was before a tragedy struck, a series of unexplained disappearances, the sudden decay of the attractions, and a creeping darkness that consumed everything in its path. Sarah's gut told her that in those twisted rides and empty stalls lay secrets worth exposing, a story that must be told even if it came at a terrible cost. Her car's headlights pierced the creeping mist as she navigated the narrow gravel road to the carnival. The air was heavy with the tang of damp metal and decaying wood. As she stepped out of the vehicle, the wind carried a faint, disembodied giggle, a sound that sent a shiver down her spine. Before her loomed the towering, chipped sign of the Midnight Carnival, its letters flickering with intermittent bursts of unstable light, as if struggling to hold back the darkness. Pushing through a tangle of overgrown brush and rusted chain-link fences, Sarah approached the center of the carnival grounds. The remnants of attractions, carousels with missing horses, silent funhouses with shattered mirrors, and an ominous Ferris wheel standing motionless, seemed to watch her with unblinking eyes. Every step she took was accompanied by a symphony of creaks and groans, as though the very ground was mourning the loss of laughter and joy. She reached the entrance of a grand marquee tent, its faded red canvas sagging in the wind. A neon outline of a grinning clown flickered erratically above the entrance, a grotesque smile that seemed unnaturally aware. Hesitating for only a moment, Sarah clutched her recorder and notepad close to her chest. She pushed the tent flap aside and stepped into a cavern of darkness, punctuated by stray beams of light filtering through holes in the fabric. Inside, the air was thick with the weight of forgotten celebration. The floor, once adorned with vibrant confetti, was now a mosaic of dust and decay. In the center of the tent, a dusty Calliope sat silent. Its keys were yellowed and brittle with age. As Sarah's flashlight beam fell upon it, a chill ran up her spine. It was then that a soft voice, nearly indistinguishable from the rustling of the torn canvas, called her name. "Sarah! Sarah!" Startled, she spun around. There, crouched behind a collapsed carnival stand, was the spectral figure of a child, a translucent small form wearing a torn party hat and a smile frozen in sorrow. The child's eyes, shimmering with a sorrow that transcended innocence, looked directly into Sarah's. Who are you? Sarah managed to whisper, her voice barely audible in the oppressive silence. The spectral child's voice was soft and laden with despair. I'm Ellie, it said, words dripping with the weight of endless nights. I used to come here every summer to see the lights and hear the music, but one day the show ended. Now we're all trapped, waiting for the night that never comes. Before she could ask more, the tent seemed to pulse with life. Faded banners rippled as though stirred by unseen hands, and the sound of distant, eerie laughter began to fill the space. Sarah's heart pounded as a deeper voice broke the fragile tranquility behind her. Leave while you still can, child of the living, intoned a voice that resonated from the darkness behind the calliope. Slow, deliberate steps echoed as a tall figure emerged, a gaunt carnival barker with hollow, milky eyes and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. His voice was both inviting and threatening, each syllable measured. "Welcome to our final performance," he said, gesturing to the scattered relics of an era long past. "We did not choose this fate. The curse that binds these grounds demands the souls of the curious. Many have come before you, and many will follow." Sarah's throat tightened. "What do you mean by curse?" she asked, her voice trembling more with each passing second. A macabre smile curved the barker's lips as he stepped into a stray beam of light, revealing half-decayed features that might have once been handsome. "Years ago," he began, his voice echoing like a dirge, "the carnival was a celebration of life and joy, a meeting of mirth and magic. But the proprietor, a man consumed by greed and a desire for eternal glory, made a dark bargain. In exchange for unending success, he sacrificed the happiness of those who trusted him. When his peddled promises failed and tragedy struck, the carnival's joy turned to sorrow. Now the curse feeds on the despair of lost souls, trapping them in this perpetual twilight." The barker paused, his eyes flashing with something like pity or warning. "Tonight, the veil is thin, and the boundary between the living and the damned blurs. You've come seeking truth, haven't you?" Sarah nodded slowly. "Yes. I want to know what really happened here." "Then come," he said, turning toward a narrow passageway behind a row of abandoned game booths. "Let us show you the remnants of our past, the echoes that never die." Reluctantly, Sarah followed him through the labyrinth of decaying stalls and boarded attractions. Shadows danced on warped walls, and every sound seemed amplified in the oppressive hush of the night. The barker led her past a funhouse whose twisted mirrors reflected not just her own horrified face, but hints of tortured visages that lurked behind. Whispers of old laughter and cries of agony mingled together, creating a cacophony that raised the hairs on her arms. They arrived at a secluded area behind the main grounds, a hidden space that once served as the carnival's living quarters. Now, it was little more than a cluster of dilapidated trailers, their windows shattered and interiors consumed by decay. The barker halted at the entrance of one trailer with a faded emblem, the House of Miracles. Inside, piles of discarded costumes, tattered posters, and broken props lay scattered in a chaotic jumble. In the midst of the disorder, Sarah could make out a large mirror, its reflective surface cracked in a spiderweb of fissures. As she approached it, a sudden gust of wind snuffed out the feeble beam of her flashlight. For a moment, she stood in utter darkness, her heart hammering as every instinct screamed to flee. Then a dim glow emanated from the mirror, revealing not her own frightened face, but a horrific tableau. A group of figures standing in silent torment, their eyes vacant and mouths twisted in eternal screams. One figure, more distinct than the others, a woman with eyes of burning sorrow and hands reaching outward in silent supplication, stepped forward. "Do you see our plight?" the spectral woman whispered, her voice echoing like the rustle of dead leaves. "We are the lost, the betrayed, and the damned. Our lives were snuffed out by the carnival's false promise. We are forever bound to these grounds, forced to relive our final moments." Sarah's stomach churned as she absorbed the weight of the woman's words. "How can I help you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, the woman's spectral eyes fixed on hers with desperate intensity. "Remember us. Tell our story to free us from this endless night. Break the cycle of greed and sorrow that condemns us all." Before Sarah could respond, the trailer seemed to convulse with an unnatural shudder. The walls groaned as though burdened with untold secrets, and a sudden piercing scream, both inhuman and heart-wrenching, shattered the silence. The barker's voice, now filled with urgency and mourning, boomed through the cramped space. Time is fleeting, Sarah. The carnival's curse grows stronger as the midnight hour draws near. You must choose. Do you take this burden of truth, knowing it may forever chain you to our fate? Or do you flee, leaving our souls to suffer in silence? A maelstrom of conflicting emotions surged within her. Every instinct urged her to escape from this vortex of horror, yet a stubborn duty to the lost pulled her further into their darkness. I want to help, she stuttered, her voice resolute despite her fear. I need to know everything so that the world may remember what happened here. With that, the barker nodded gravely and gestured toward a narrow door at the back of the trailer. Come, there is one place where the full extent of our tragedy is laid bare, a hall of memories where the true horror began. Sarah followed him through a cramped passageway that led to a room she soon realized was once the carnival's main tent, a majestic marquee that had seen better days. Now its canvas was faded and torn, revealing a mosaic of eerie sketches, cryptic symbols, and faded photographs of smiling performers whose eyes, in retrospect, looked haunted. At the center of the room, a weathered wooden desk was strewn with diaries, letters, and newspaper clippings detailing a history of ambition, betrayal, and bloodshed. The barker carefully opened one of the diaries. His voice, now quieter and laden with sorrow, narrated the twisted tale that had birthed the curse. The carnival's founder, Augustus Mallory, was a man of immense ambition. Believing that his art could defy death itself, he made a pact with forces beyond mortal ken, a bargain that required a sacrifice. In his hubris, he doomed not only himself but everyone who ever placed their trust in him. When the unthinkable occurred, the sudden disappearance of those closest to him, the carnival was marked. It became a living monument to treachery and despair, where every ride, every attraction holds the echoes of that fateful moment. As the barker's grim tale unfolded, the room seemed to darken, and the very air vibrated with an ancient malice. Sarah's eyes fell upon a photograph, a sepia-toned image of Mallory with a cold, calculating smile on his face, flanked by performers whose eyes brimmed with silent terror. In the margins of the diary, frantic scrawls pleaded for forgiveness, for the curse to be lifted, and for the truth to finally set them free. A sudden crash of thunder rattled the marquee, and the overhead skylight shattered, sending shards of glass cascading onto the desk. In that moment, a figure emerged from the wreckage, a tall, gaunt man draped in a threadbare suit. His eyes glowed with a cold, unyielding light, and his voice, when it came, was a low and menacing murmur that vibrated through Sarah's very core. "You dare disturb our pain and seek the truth?" he demanded, his tone laced with bitter reproach. Know that some secrets are best left buried. The sacrifice demanded by Mallory was not just of flesh, but of hope, and by unearthing these truths, you may very well seal your own fate. Sarah's heart pounded in her ears as she stared at the spectral man. "I need to know," she replied, voice cracking with fear and determination. "If telling your story can free you, then I must honor your memory, even if it risks my soul." The apparition's face twisted into something akin to a sneer, and he stepped forward until he loomed over her. "Then prepare yourself for the final act of our tragic play," he said quietly. "For once you accept the weight of our sorrow, you will become part of our endless performance. There is no escape from the Midnight Carnival's embrace." At that moment, the room convulsed in a sudden, violent tremor. The diary pages were whipped into a frenzy by an unseen wind, the faded photographs fluttering like desperate birds. Shadows coalesced into grotesque forms that writhed along the walls, their mournful wails blending with the clamor of the storm outside. The barker's eyes shone with tears that sparkled in the dim light as he urged, "Remember us, Sarah. Let our voices echo beyond this cursed night." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she clutched the diary tightly, the truth of Mallory's dark bargain and the ensuing curse weighing down on her very soul. In that heart-stopping moment, she felt the carnival's malignant presence invade her senses, each whisper of agony, each echo of lost laughter, claiming a small piece of her humanity. Slowly, as if guided by an unseen force, she made her way back through the ruined corridors of the trailer, the voices of the damned growing fainter with each step. The spectral figures that had once reached out to her now receded into the mist, their eternal laments drifting across the abandoned grounds. Outside, the wind had calmed to a mournful howl, and the night's oppressive gloom began to lift imperceptibly as the first hints of dawn whispered on the horizon. Standing before the battered neon sign of the Midnight Carnival, Sarah felt an overwhelming blend of despair and resolve. Though the memories of that night would forever haunt her dreams, and the weight of countless lost souls now resided in her heart, she knew that she must share the story of the cursed carnival with a world too eager to forget its past. Each word she penned, each photograph she developed, would serve as a requiem for those trapped in the relentless cycle of sorrow and darkness. As she drove away from the ghostly grounds of the carnival, the pages of her diary crinkled in the back seat, a promise to never let the voices of the lost fade into silence. In the quiet moments between sleep and wakefulness, she would sometimes hear the distant echo of that child's laughter and the carnival barker's solemn warning. And in those fleeting moments, Sarah knew that the midnight carnival would forever beckon to the curious and the courageous, drawing them into its tragic performance. A performance where every revelation was paid for with a piece of the soul.
Story number 8.
The sea raged as twilight surrendered to an ink-black night, its relentless roar mingling with the forlorn cries of the wind. Far from any bustling port, beyond the reach of city lights, the isolated cliffs of Bleak Shore guarded a secret, a decrepit lighthouse known simply as the Beacon. Its weathered stone walls and rusted metal fittings bore silent witness to centuries of shipwrecks, lost souls, and whispered curses carried by the ceaseless tides. In this forsaken place, Jacob Marlowe, a man in search of absolution from a past marred by regret, stepped onto the slippery path that led to the lighthouse. Marlowe's journey had not been a choice made lightly. The solitude of Bleak Shore called to him like a lullaby of penance, offering both isolation and the chance to confront the demons that had haunted his every waking hour. A former historian whose career had been derailed by personal tragedy, he had grown disillusioned with the world's clamor and superficial promises. The tales of the Beacon, spoken of in hushed tones in coastal taverns and gleaned from scattered archival documents, promised a confrontation with truth and terror alike. With nothing left to lose, he resolved to take on the role of caretaker of the long-abandoned lighthouse, a decision that would lead him into the heart of unspeakable horrors. The approach to the Beacon was treacherous. Jagged rocks jutted out from the swirling surf as he trudged along the narrow, wind-swept trail. Every step was accompanied by the relentless assault of salt-laden air and the murmurs of long-gone mariners. The lighthouse, perched atop a wind-swept outcrop, appeared as a forlorn sentinel battling the elements. Its once proud white facade was now marred by centuries of sea spray and neglect, and the stained glass windows, clouded with grime, revealed glimpses of a ghostly interior. Jacob pushed the heavy, splintered door open. It creaked in protest, as if mourning the inevitable intrusion of another soul into this repository of past grief. Inside, the lighthouse held only shadows and echoes. A solitary spiral staircase wound its way upward, disappearing into darkness like a twisted promise of hidden memories. Light from his flickering lantern danced over peeling wallpaper and corroded metal, illuminating snippets of faded maritime charts, rusted instruments, and moldy logs cluttering a forgotten desk. "Welcome," came a rasping whisper, barely audible above the howl of the wind outside. Jacob stiffened, his heart pounding in his chest. He whipped around, searching the dim room for the source of the sound, but saw only emptiness and shifting shadows. "Who's there?" he called, voice trembling between curiosity and apprehension. For a moment, silence reigned. Then a figure emerged from the gloom, a gaunt man clothed in archaic garments, his eyes reflecting an otherworldly sorrow. "I am Elias," the apparition murmured. "Once I manned these steps in search of salvation. Now I remain, bound by regret." His spectral voice reverberated through the cramped space, carrying with it the weight of endless mourning. Jacob's throat constricted. "Bound? By what sorrow?" he asked, his voice a hesitant blend of academic inquiry and personal terror. Elias drifted closer, every movement deliberate and filled with palpable anguish. "This lighthouse is a gateway," he whispered, "a beacon not of hope but of despair, a lure for those too burdened with their own guilt. The tragic souls of the sea, the drowned and the damned, they call out in the darkness, searching for reprieve that will never come, and those who set foot here become part of our eternal lament." A shiver surged down Jacob's spine as the ghostly figure receded into the shadows. Resolute, yet shaken by the spectral warning, he climbed the narrow staircase with each step echoing like a heartbeat of doom. The further he ascended, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. Faded nautical paintings lined the walls, their subjects gazing out with eyes that seemed to follow his every move. Between each landing, he discovered fragments of diaries and log entries left behind by long-departed keepers. Their ink, smudged with time, told of storms both in the sea and within the souls of men, a litany of tragedy, betrayal, and unanswered prayer. At the top of the spiral stairs, the lantern's light revealed a circular chamber encased in heavy, salt-stained glass. This was the lantern room, the heart of the lighthouse. Here, the mighty Fresnel lens, now fractured and dim, once cast a guiding beam over tumultuous waters. Now, it was a relic of despair, its surface mottled by innumerable nights of sorrow. Jacob approached the massive lens with a sense of trepidation, feeling as if the very air around him trembled with suppressed lamentations. In that moment, the room itself seemed to breathe, and whispers arose from the very walls. Voices mingled in a chorus of lament, a cacophony of despair that spoke of lost love, tragic choices, and the relentless passage of time. "Set us free," they moaned. "Remember our names." The words ebbed and flowed like the tide, seeping into Jacob's thoughts and dredging up memories he had long tried to forget. "Who are you?" he demanded aloud, his voice echoing against the solitary glass pane. The air grew colder, and from the far corner of the room stepped a woman clad in tattered garments, her hair a cascade of silvery strands. Her eyes, wide and pleading, shone with an ethereal light that belied a century of sorrow. "My name is Isabel," she said softly. "I too was once here, a keeper of hope that has long since withered." Her apparition moved toward him, her feet leaving no trace on the time-worn floor. "This place," she began, voice trembling as if caught between worlds, "was meant to guide lost souls to safety, but something went wrong. A storm of malevolence swept over the night sea, twisting destiny into a nightmare. In my desperation to save them, I made a choice, a bargain with the unknown. Now I am cursed to witness the suffering of every soul that dares to seek refuge here." Jacob felt his stomach twist with a mix of horror and sorrow. "What bargain? What curse?" he pressed, desperate for answers that might explain the oppressive aura of the lighthouse. Isabel's face contorted in anguish. "I sacrificed what I held most dear in exchange for a promise of salvation," she whispered, tears glistening like dew on her spectral cheeks. "But hope was a fickle master, and the promise was broken in the depths of the storm. Now I am haunted by the voices of those I could not save, and the weight of their suffering chains me to this doomed beacon." The conversation seemed to draw the very darkness around them tighter. The wind moaned through the broken panes, and the cold seeped into Jacob's bones. He knew that he had come seeking truth, but the revelations he encountered threatened to overwhelm him. Yet, buried in the depths of his own history was a burden of guilt that had compelled him to travel this lonely road, to face the consequences of choices made long ago. I have carried my own regrets," he admitted, his voice steadying as he confronted the mirror of his inner darkness. "Perhaps coming here is a way to learn how to forgive myself." A long silence followed his words, broken only by the mournful chorus of distant waves crashing against the cliffs below. Isabel's expression softened into something that might have been compassion. "Forgiveness is not easily found in a place such as this," she murmured. "Here, the past and its regrets have no rest. But if you are willing, you may help break the cycle. Listen well and heed my warning. The path to redemption comes with a price that many have balked at." At that, the sound of a distant bell tolled, a slow, resonant knell that vibrated through the lantern room. Jacob felt as though each chime hammered his heart with unbearable weight. He took a deep breath and summoned what courage he had left. "What must I do?" he asked, determination laced through his trembling voice. Isabel's spectral face grew solemn. "Beyond these walls lies a hidden chamber, sealed for generations by the keepers of this beacon. It is here that the darkest secrets were locked away, the accounts of sacrifices, the broken promises, and the unspoken pleas of souls denied release. To lift the curse, you must enter that chamber and confront the truth behind our torment. In doing so, you may find a measure of absolution for both our souls and your own." The gravity of her words pressed on Jacob as he turned toward a narrow door concealed behind a tattered curtain. With a trembling hand, he pushed the barrier aside and descended a final flight of creaking steps into the bowels of the lighthouse. The passage was narrow, lined with damp stone that glistened with condensation. and the faint scent of brine mingled with the acrid odor of decay. At the end of the passage, he entered a cavernous chamber bathed in an otherworldly glow that seemed to emanate from the very walls. Ancient symbols, carved deeply into the stone, pulsed with an eerie luminescence, their shapes both mesmerizing and repulsive. In the center of the room, on a stone plinth, lay a weathered ledger, the record of every soul touched by the curse of the beacon. In faded script, names, dates, and cryptic notes chronicled a saga of despair and broken dreams, the ink as dark as the secrets it held. Jacob approached the ledger with a mixture of dread and resolve. His hands shook as he opened its brittle pages. Each entry was a confession, a final plea for forgiveness, and a testimony to the endless torment inflicted upon the doomed. Amid the entries, one name caught his eye, a name that had haunted him in fragments of memory and whispered regrets. It was the name of a man whose demise had shattered Jacob's world many years ago, a failure he had never managed to forgive himself for. The ledger revealed that this man, his estranged brother, had been among the lost souls claimed by the unforgiving tide during a fateful storm. His name, written in trembling hand, now served as both an epitaph and a condemnation, a legacy of guilt that Jacob had carried alone. A scream, low and agonized, suddenly echoed from the far side of the chamber. The sound cut through the oppressive silence, jolting Jacob into a state of heightened terror and resolve. Shadows coalesced and took form along the edges of the room as spectral apparitions stirred, a procession of broken souls drawn to the ledger like moths to a dying flame. Their voices rose in a discordant chorus, pleading for vengeance and mercy in equal measure. "Bring us peace," one ghostly figure whispered, its eyes hollow but burning with forlorn hope. "Release us from this eternal prison of regret." "Show us the truth," another cried, voice echoing with the sound of crashing waves. Jacob's throat constricted under the weight of their lamentations. He understood that his own burden was now inextricably linked to the fate of those confined within these stones. With a renewed determination born of years of self-reproach and sorrow, he spoke aloud, his voice reverberating against the ancient walls. "I cannot undo the past, but I will honor it. I will tell your stories, and in doing so, find forgiveness for the sins that bind us all." As his words settled in the still air, a transformation seemed to sweep over the chamber. The spectral figures gathered, their forms softening as if emboldened by his vow. In that solemn moment, Jacob felt a profound shift. The oppressive malice that had long clung to the lighthouse began to wane, replaced by a fragile hope that truth and remembrance might someday heal even the deepest wounds. Yet, as he prepared to leave the hidden chamber, a final, resounding voice boomed from the darkness. A voice that was both sorrowful and wrathful, echoing the ancient pact forged by misguided ambition. "Be warned, seeker of redemption," it thundered. "To free the souls of the damned, you must forever carry their torment. The truth is a double-edged blade. It may set us free, but it will also leave scars upon your soul, a reminder that some tragedies never truly end." Jacob bowed his head, accepting the weight of his promise. "I accept that burden," he whispered solemnly. "I will bear your stories with honesty and compassion, and I will not let your voices fade into oblivion." With that final declaration, the spectral throng receded, leaving behind a silence that was at once mournful and strangely cathartic. The ledger's entries glowed gently in the dim light, as if acknowledging the pact formed within those ancient walls. Jacob closed the fragile book and took a deep, shuddering breath, feeling, for the first time in years, that his search for truth had brought him closer to absolution. He retraced his steps up the damp, spiral staircase, back into the lantern room of the lighthouse, a chamber that now seemed less oppressive, touched by the glimmer of release. Outside, as dawn's first light crept over the horizon and painted the stormy seas with gentle hues, Jacob stood at the base of the beacon, his heart both heavy and hopeful. The secrets of Bleak Shore were now his to share, a responsibility that promised healing, even as it condemned him to remember the unfathomable depths of human tragedy. Driving away from the lighthouse along the winding coastal road, Jacob knew that the scars of that night would linger in his dreams and in the whispers of the wind. Yet, as he began to pen the accounts of the beacon and its long-forgotten souls, he found solace in the belief that every tale of torment, when told with truth and compassion, might one day lead to redemption, a truth hard-won in the loneliness of a forsaken lighthouse by the edge of an unforgiving sea.
Story number 9.
In the heart of a bleak, windswept countryside where autumn's chill clung to every forgotten stone, there stood the Ashen Vale Orphanage, a hulking, derelict building draped in creeping ivy and shrouded by an oppressive silence. The building's once proud facade, now pockmarked with the ravages of time and neglect, exuded a sense of foreboding that made even the hardiest locals avert their eyes. Rumors had long circulated through the nearby village, whispered tales of children's laughter fading into anguished sobs, of endless corridors echoing with torment, and of secrets buried deep within the orphanage's decaying walls. It was on a wind-lashed evening, with the sky a tapestry of bruised purples and ashen grays, that Evelyn Hart, an intrepid journalist determined to uncover the truth behind local legends, approached the wrought iron gate of Ashen Vale. Clad in a heavy coat and armed with nothing more than a digital recorder, a notebook, and an unyielding curiosity, Evelyn stepped into the domain of sorrow. The gate protested with a shrill metallic groan, as though it were warning her away, but Evelyn pressed forward, each step echoing on the gravel path that led to the orphanage's looming entrance. Inside the courtyard, the overgrown weeds writhed among shattered statues and crumbling benches. The air was heavy with the tang of damp earth and an indefinable melancholy that clung to every surface. A battered sign, its letters barely visible beneath layers of grime, read, Ashen Vale Orphanage. The very name evoked images of spectral veils drifting between the realms of the living and the dead, a fitting title for a place that had witnessed so much suffering. Evelyn's pulse quickened as she pushed open the massive oak door, its wood swollen by decades of moisture. The entrance hall was cavernous and dim, lit only by scattered shafts of light that pierced the gloom through broken windows. Dust motes danced in the feeble beams, and long-forgotten relics, a torn doll, a cracked mirror, faded drawings on the walls, offered silent testimony to happier times that had been lost in the passage of years. Every sound seemed amplified in the oppressive quiet. The creak of wood, the soft scuttle of unseen rodents, and her own labored breathing mixing into a symphony of despair. "Welcome, seeker." The voice came then, soft, almost imperceptible at first, like a lullaby sung by a ghost. Evelyn froze, her recorder clutched in her hand. "Hello?" she murmured, straining to locate the source of the sound. In the far corner of the hall, near a tattered mural of children at play, a faint figure flickered into view. It was a little girl, dressed in a faded pinafore, her eyes enormous and sorrowful as they met Evelyn's gaze. "I'm Lucy," the child whispered, her voice trembling like brittle leaves in the wind. "You shouldn't be here. Please go back." Before Evelyn could ask Lucy more, the ghostly vision melted away into the shadows, leaving behind a chill that seeped into her bones. Torn between her duty to uncover the truth and the instinct to flee, Evelyn steadied herself. "I mean no harm," she said softly to the empty air. "I just want to know your story." Her words echoed unanswered, swallowed by the vast emptiness of the orphanage. Driven by equal parts terror and compassion, Evelyn set off deeper into the labyrinthine corridors. The narrow hallways were lined with closed doors, each a portal to memories that had been long consigned to darkness. Every step seemed to stir echoes of the past, as if the very walls were whispering forgotten secrets and regrets. At the end of one particularly long corridor, Evelyn found a classroom that retained vestiges of its former life. Wooden desks stood in rigid rows beneath a battered blackboard, and dusty children's drawings, their cheerful colors almost mocking the present gloom, were pinned haphazardly on the walls. As she moved among the desks, the sound of scuffling and soft giggles rose and fell around her, disembodied and sorrowful. It was as if the ghosts of laughter and innocent voices were trying desperately to break through the heavy shroud of despair. "Why did you leave?" a quiet voice asked from behind a desk. Startled, Evelyn turned sharply and came face to face with the apparition of a teacher, a stern yet gentle woman in a faded dress, her eyes filled with both sorrow and longing. Her presence was magnetic, a living relic of a time before tragedy had cast its long shadow over the orphanage. "We tried to protect you," the teacher said, her tone laden with a mixture of regret and anguish. "But darkness came, and with it, despair. One by one, the children disappeared, swallowed by a promise that turned to dust. And when I stayed, it was to ensure you were not forgotten." Evelyn's heart pounded, each beat echoing the teacher's grief. "Who are you?" she asked softly. "My name was Agnes," the teacher replied, her lips trembling in silent lament. I was here when the night came, when the promise was broken. I stayed to guard the little ones, to keep their memory alive. But in doing so, I was bound to this place, as are they. Agnes's ghost faded into the gloom as abruptly as she had appeared, leaving Evelyn with more questions than answers. Compelled to press on, she gathered her resolve and left the classroom, venturing further into the heart of Ashenvale Orphanage. With each step, the oppressive energy grew heavier, and a pervasive sense of dread began to gnaw at her resolve. The further she went, the more vivid the manifestations of pain became. A rusty swing moving slowly in an empty courtyard, lullabies that began in the distance and faded into a chorus of mournful sighs, and fleeting glimpses of small figures darting just beyond her sight, as if warning her away. By midnight, the atmosphere had shifted entirely, and the old orphanage transformed into a realm of perpetual twilight. In a vast, disused chapel appended to the main building, Evelyn found herself surrounded by relics of devotion and despair. Tattered prayer books lay open on pews, and a solitary candle burned feebly at the altar, its flame dancing as if in silent convocation with unseen presences. Here, in the sanctum of sorrow, came a voice that resonated with the finality of lost hope. "We are the forgotten," intoned a deep, resonant murmur that seemed to emanate from every stone, every sliver of darkness. Evelyn pressed her hand to the cool wall, feeling an almost tangible pulse of despair beneath her fingers, a rhythm that matched the steady, relentless thump of her own heart. "Why do you remain?" she demanded, her voice quivering with both terror and determination. "What binds you here?" From the darkness emerged the spectral figure of a boy, no older than 10, his eyes wide with unspoken terror and pleading for rescue. "We stayed because no one remembered," he said, the words barely a whisper. "They left us here, and now we are trapped between what was and what will never be." His voice cracked with a despair that cut through the silence like a knife. "If you remember us, perhaps we can be freed from this endless night." Compelled by the boy's desperate appeal, Evelyn vowed to uncover the truth behind the orphanage's curse. Over the following hours, she pored over brittle documents hidden away in a forgotten office. Records that chronicled the last days of Ashenvale, confessions of staff, and the desperate pleas of lost souls. The files revealed a ritual, a pact made in the desperate hope of saving the children from some unspeakable calamity that had befallen the orphanage. In exchange for a promise of salvation, the administrators had unwittingly forged a covenant with forces far darker than they could have ever imagined. The promise was never fulfilled, and the ritual had backfired, binding every soul within the building to eternal suffering. As Evelyn read the final, harrowing entry, a handwritten note in a trembling scrawl that ended abruptly with the words, "May our voices be heard," a cold wind burst through the shattered windows. The pages fluttered as if alive, and the sounds of anguished cries swelled around her. The building itself seemed to moan, each creak and groan a lament of untold sorrow. It was then that a presence far more malevolent than the lingering specters made itself known. In the darkest recess of the chapel, a door slowly swung open, revealing a passage that led downward into a hidden crypt. Heart hammering in her chest, Evelyn took hesitant steps into this subterranean realm, her lantern casting unsteady shadows on damp, stone walls inscribed with cryptic symbols of binding and damnation. The air was thick with the stench of decay and forgotten grief. Here, the true depth of the orphanage's curse was laid bare. Along the walls were etched names, each a lost soul whose fate had been sealed on that cursed night. At the center of the crypt stood a long, cold stone slab, upon which lay a faded, cracked portrait of a young girl whose eyes were remarkably lifelike, despite the ravages of time. As Evelyn drew closer, the temperature plummeted, and the silence was shattered by a chorus of whispers, each voice pleading for salvation, for remembrance. The girl's eyes seemed to weep spectral tears as she spoke directly to Evelyn, her voice lilting with ancient sorrow. "Remember us?" the apparition pleaded, her voice echoing with the weight of centuries of neglect. "Remember that we were here, that we were loved, and that our pain may yet be redeemed." Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes as she reached out, her fingers trembling as they touched the cold stone. In that fragile moment, the barrier between past and present seemed to crumble. The ghostly apparitions of the orphans, the little figures who had once roamed the halls with innocent laughter, now twisted by despair, materialized around her in a circle of silent supplication. Their faces, contorted with sorrow, shone with a desperate hope that somehow, by bearing witness to their story, they might finally be released from the purgatory of Ashen Vale. A final, earth-shattering groan reverberated through the crypt as if the building itself were mourning the centuries of pain it had harbored. Evelyn, overwhelmed by the intensity of the experience, sank to her knees. "I promise," she whispered hoarsely, "I will make sure the world knows your story. I will remember every name, every cry for help, so that you are not lost to the darkness any longer." In that solemn vow, the oppressive energy that had stifled the crypt began to ebb, and a gentle radiance seeped from the carved symbols on the walls. One by one, the sorrowful figures shimmered and faded, their anguished faces breaking into expressions of tentative relief. The heavy chains of the curse that had bound them for so long appeared to weaken in the face of Evelyn's heartfelt confession and promise. A quiet, almost imperceptible sigh seemed to emanate from the very stones, as if the orphanage itself were exhaling a long-held breath of sorrow and resignation. Climbing back into the musty corridors of the orphanage above, Evelyn emerged into the wan light of dawn. The first pale rays filtered through broken windows, casting long, melancholic shadows on the cold, cracked floors. Though the building was far from restored, there was a subtle transformation, a sense that the voices of those tortured souls were finally being acknowledged, their tragedies given a voice in the waking world. Exhausted yet resolute, Evelyn gathered her notes, recordings, and the fragile remnants of the truth she had uncovered. As she stepped out through the heavy front door, she cast one final glance at Ashen Vale Orphanage, a monolith of despair that for so long had been condemned to silence. Now, with her vow echoing in her heart, the orphanage was poised to be remembered not just as a house of horrors, but as a monument to the resilience of lost souls and the healing power of truth. Evelyn's story, when published, sent tremors through the small village and beyond. Readers, captivated by the chilling recounting of each name, every whispered plea, and every sorrow etched into the very stone of Ashen Vale, found themselves haunted by the memory of that forsaken place. And though the orphanage still stood in its forlorn isolation, its ghosts were no longer prisoners of oblivion. They lived on in the pages of truth, forever remembered by a woman who had dared to step into the darkness and bring light to the haunted whispers of the past.
Story number 10.
A bitter rain fell in relentless sheets as Mara Whitlock drove down a narrow, winding road in the dead of night. The headlights of her aging sedan barely penetrated the dense fog that blanketed the forest, and the only sound was the steady thump of her heartbeat and the rhythmic swish of windshield wipers against nature's despair. Overhead, thunder grumbled like a wounded beast, and the flickering beam of lightning briefly unveiled the twisted silhouettes of ancient oak trees. Somewhere in the distance, a tolling bell warned of approaching doom, a sound that seemed both out of place and wholly inevitable. Mara had always been drawn to the strange and inexplicable, a compulsion that bordered on obsession. For years, she had collected fragments of lore about forgotten places, a decaying psychiatric hospital, a rundown lighthouse, and most recently, the abandoned Black Hollow Manor. Local legends claimed it was built by a reclusive family whose destiny had been marred by misfortune, betrayal, and a secret too terrible to speak aloud. Though the manor had lain empty for decades, its presence was unmistakable, a looming relic shrouded in the mists of time and burdened with the weight of tragedy. Tonight, in search of answers to the mysterious tales of ghostly apparitions and restless souls, Mara steered her car toward Black Hollow with trembling determination. The mansion emerged from the gloom like a half-remembered nightmare. Its once grand facade was now an intricate tapestry of crumbling stone and entangled ivy, with broken windows that glinted in the occasional lightning strike like the eyes of long-dead watchers. A heavy, ornate oak door bearing rust and age swung open at her hesitant push, revealing an entrance hall steeped in darkness and decay. Every footstep Mara took echoed through the cavernous space, an unwelcome reminder that she was trespassing in a domain that time had forsaken. "Who's there?" Her voice, small and quavering, disturbed the silence. For a heartbeat, nothing but the drip of water and the soft rasp of peeling wallpaper answered. Then, from the far end of the hall, a figure emerged, a woman draped in shadows. her eyes, luminous and haunted, fixated on Mara with an intensity that froze her in place. "You shouldn't have come," the figure whispered, her voice both sorrowful and accusing. "This is a house of forgotten regrets and bitter truths." The apparition hovered just at the threshold of sight, her outline wavering like a mirage. Mara swallowed hard, her internal conflict a tumult of fear and fascination. I need to know," she managed, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I've heard the stories about the restless souls, about those who can't sleep." The ghost's eyes glimmered with an ancient grief. "They are here," she said softly, "cursed to wander these halls. Every secret, every sorrow echoes in every crevice of Black Hollow Manor." With that, she drifted away, disappearing into the gloom as if swallowed by the mansion itself. Mara's pulse raced as she ventured deeper into the manor. The corridors stretched before her, lined with faded portraits whose painted eyes seemed to follow her every move. In the dim light of her flashlight, the faces revealed expressions of despair and torment. A collection of souls whose lives had ended in anguish, and whose memories were left to rot behind crumbling walls. She passed a grand staircase, its balustrade chipped and splintered, and ascended slowly, each creaking step an echo from a forgotten past. In a narrow hallway off the main foyer, Mara found a small study cluttered with decaying furniture and yellowed papers that lay scattered like lost dreams. Among the debris was a leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and stained with age. Compelled by the need to understand what had befallen the family that once dwelled here, she settled on an overturned chair and gingerly opened the fragile book. The pages recorded in a spidery hand spoke of melancholy days, of familial strife, and of a terrible pact made in desperation. One entry chilled her to the core. "The night has come when our sins must be revealed. Sleep is our sanctuary and our prison. For those who do not rest become vessels of our eternal sorrow." Before she could read further, a heavy, sorrowful sound echoed through the corridor. The creak of a door, as if someone or something had disturbed the silence. Mara's breath caught in her throat as she closed the journal, realizing that she was not alone. From within the darkness at the far end of the hall, a tall, gaunt man appeared. His eyes were sunken, and his skin had the pallor of one who had known unspeakable torment. "Who are you?" Mara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man's reply was soft and laden with regret. "I am Nathaniel," he said, each syllable heavy with ancient sorrow. "I once was a part of this family before madness claimed us all. I wander these halls in search of forgiveness, though no absolution awaits." His gaze bore into her as if weighing her worth, his voice a litany of despair. "The curse is not just a tale, it is real. It binds us to the night, condemning our souls to an eternity of unrest." Mara's mind reeled with questions, a torrent of inquiries about the nature of the curse, the tragic history of the manor, and the endless nightmare of sleeplessness that plagued its inhabitants. "What happened here?" she demanded, her eyes shining with both terror and resolve. Nathaniel's face contorted with anguish as he recounted the grim details. "Black Hollow was built in a time of ambition and secrets. My ancestors sought power through forbidden means, a pact with forces beyond our understanding. In exchange for wealth and honor, they sacrificed the peace of our souls. The manor became a tomb of torment, a place where every sin is inscribed on these walls, a chamber of ceaseless regret. At night, the veil between the living and the dead thins, and our pain is relived again and again." His voice faltered as he continued, "I have tried to escape, to find solace in sleep, but the curse will not let me go. Every time I close my eyes, the nightmares return, endless, unrelenting." Suddenly, distant whispers filled the corridor, a murmur of voices overlapping in a dissonant chorus. The sound grew louder, resonating from every nook as if the very mansion were speaking in unison. Mara felt a chill seep into her bones, her senses overwhelmed by the oppressive presence that surrounded her. They are coming," Nathaniel said urgently, his hand trembling as he reached out for her. "You must be careful. The spirits are restless tonight. They hunger for acknowledgement, proof that their suffering is not in vain." Grasping his hand with a mix of fear and determination, Mara followed Nathaniel deeper into the labyrinth of Black Hollow. Their path wound past crumbling libraries filled with forgotten tomes, past corridors reeking of decay and despair, until they reached a hidden chamber at the very back of the manor. This room, small and nearly sealed off, held a single ornate mirror framed in tarnished silver. The glass was cracked in a spiderweb of fractures, yet it shimmered with an almost hypnotic glow. "Look into the mirror," Nathaniel urged, his voice trembling. "It shows the truth of our existence, every sorrow, every sin, every sleepless tear that has stained this house." With her heart hammering in her chest, Mara approached the mirror. As she gazed into its depths, the reflections she saw were not her own. Instead, images of unspeakable horrors and tormented souls filled the glass. The ghostly silhouettes of family members whose eyes were hollow with despair, scenes of nightmarish rituals, and visions of a dark figure, its presence oppressive and all-encompassing, looming over the manor as if orchestrating the curse itself. A shudder ran through Mara as the vision deepened. Amid the tortured faces, a final image emerged, that of a small child, her eyes wide and pleading, her tiny hand reaching out toward the darkness. The child's whisper, barely audible, pierced through the cacophony. "Please, help us." At that moment, the mirror's surface rippled as if stirred by an unseen force. The air grew frigid and shadows peeled away from the walls, slithering toward them like spectral serpents. Nathaniel's grip tightened around Mara's wrist. "They are here," he said in a hushed tone. "They seek to drag you into their eternal nightmare." From the darkness behind them, figures emerged, ghastly apparitions with faces contorted in despair. A chorus of voices filled the chamber in a maddening refrain. "Remember us. Remember us." The room pulsed with the tortured energy of souls condemned to wander in endless vigil. Each ghostly figure bore the mark of irrevocable loss, a life cut short, a promise broken, and a love marred by betrayal. Mara's instincts screamed at her to flee, but something deeper compelled her to remain. In that moment, the weight of her own troubled past, a tapestry of regrets and sleepless nights haunted by memories of loss, resonated with the sorrow of these restless spirits. "I remember," she whispered, her voice trembling with both empathy and defiance. "I remember your pain, your story. I will not let you fade into oblivion." The voices fell silent, replaced by a heavy, almost palpable stillness. The apparitions paused as if contemplating her words, their spectral forms quivering like candle flames caught in a draft. Then, one by one, they began to recede into the shadows from whence they came, leaving behind an overwhelming emptiness that threatened to swallow the chamber whole. Nathaniel's eyes glistened with a mixture of relief and grief. "You have seen the truth," he murmured, his voice laden with sorrow. "By acknowledging our pain, perhaps you can break the cycle. But know this, the truth of Black Hollow is a burden. Its memories will haunt you, even as they grant you a chance for redemption." Mara's heart ached with the weight of the revelation. This place, this cursed mansion, was not merely haunted by errant souls, but was a living chronicle of despair, a mausoleum of sleepless regrets. With newfound resolve, she nodded slowly. "I will tell your story," she vowed. "I will carry your voices with me, even if they haunt my every step. You deserve to be remembered, to be freed from this prison of the past." Nathaniel offered her a sad smile, his spectral form flickering in the dim light. "Then go and let the world know that some nightmares are born not of terror, but of the deepest wounds of the soul. But be warned, the price of such truth is a scar upon your spirit that may never fade." As the first light of dawn began to filter through the shattered windows, Mara and Nathaniel slowly made their way back through the winding halls of Black Hollow Manor. The oppressive air had thinned slightly, leaving behind a fragile hint of hope amid the residue of sorrow. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed in the cool, pale light of a new day. Yet, as Mara climbed into her car and drove away from the haunted estate, she knew that the memories of that night, the anguished whispers, the spectral faces, the burden of endless regret, would remain with her forever. In the months that followed, Mara's account of Black Hollow Manor spread like wildfire, a haunting chronicle of a place where the boundaries between past and present had blurred, and where forgotten souls found solace only in being remembered. Though she had paid a personal price, a constant, whispered echo in the quiet moments between sleep and wakefulness, she had ensured that the truth of those restless nights would endure. For in every heart that trembled at the mere mention of Black Hollow, there lived a flicker of hope that even the darkest of curses could one day be lifted through the power of remembrance and compassion.